Hey guys, glad you're here. Maybe you're curled up in bed, a soft blanket over your shoulders, or maybe you're just letting the day slowly fade into a quiet hum. Tonight, we're going to drift into one of the strangest questions you could ask about our little blue planet. What if the Earth just stopped spinning? No more sunrise, no more sunset, just one side scorched by endless daylight, the other frozen in perpetual night. Sounds like science fiction, right? But what if I told you the consequences are far more real and more haunting than we'd like to imagine? So take a deep breath, let the static of the day melt away, because for the next few hours, we're not rushing anywhere. The world is still, and together we're going to explore what happens when the spin slows to a stop. The Earth has always been in motion. Its rotation is the silent force that draws the curtain between day and night, a rhythm so constant we no longer feel it. But if somehow that rhythm began to falter, slowing not in an instant, but gradually over years, maybe decades, everything we know would begin to feel strange, as if reality itself were quietly changing its rules. At first, the signs would be subtle, a day that seemed to stretch just a little longer than it used to, the sun hanging in the sky a few extra minutes, then an hour, then many. Clocks would still tick on the wall, of course, but our relationship with time, real biological time, would start to bend. Our bodies accustomed to the 24-hour cycle would struggle. Sleep cycles would drift. Morning and night would lose meaning. Circadian rhythms, the delicate internal patterns that guide hormone release, alertness, and rest, would fall out of sync. People would begin to feel a lingering fatigue, a heaviness behind the eyes that no cup of coffee could shake. But the human body is stubborn. We'd try to adapt shift, our schedules invent artificial ways to mimic the passage of day and night. We've done it before in space stations, in submarines in the Arctic winter. But this wouldn't be a temporary thing. The slowing spin would be permanent, and it would only get worse. Weather systems, already complex and fragile, would start to change. Wind exists because of temperature differences across Earth's surface, powered by the rotation of the planet. As the rotation slows, the Coriolis effect, the invisible force that causes air to spiral around high and low pressure systems, would weaken. Storms would no longer swirl in graceful arcs. They might stretch into long, slow-moving giants lingering over regions for days or weeks, dumping relentless rain or baking heat. Jet streams would wobble, stutter, and eventually break down entirely. The equator would grow hotter unbearably, so as the sun spent more and more time bearing down on it without rest. Meanwhile, the poles would lose what little warmth they get, plunging into darkness and deeper cold. Agriculture would begin to fail. Plants are deeply attuned to light cycles. With prolonged exposure to sunlight or darkness, they would wither or bloom at the wrong times, confused and dying. Crops would suffer. Food chains would begin to unravel. Animals that rely on instinctual migration patterns or mating seasons linked to day length would become disoriented. Their populations would shrink. Species would vanish. And through all of this, humanity would try to hold on. We would build new cities in the thin strip of land between the eternal day and the endless night, what scientists might call the twilight belt. This narrow region, always bathed in dawn or dusk, might become the last habitable zone on Earth. But even here, life would be fragile. Every step forward would feel like walking a tightrope between fire and ice. Infrastructure would have to change. Buildings would need to be engineered to withstand dramatic and static heat or cold. Energy production would become hyper-localized. Solar panels on the eternal day side, geothermal and nuclear on the night side. But how do you power a world when its very definition of day and night has broken down? Psychological effects would begin to creep in. Our minds, shaped by generations of sleep and wakefulness, would struggle in a world where the sky no longer changes. Depression, insomnia, and disorientation would become common. The sense of time, a pillar of consciousness, would slip. History, religion, art, and language would evolve. No longer tied to a rising and setting sun, human culture would fracture into new modes of thought. Children born in the twilight belt might never truly understand what a day used to be. They would live in a constant half-light, in a world where stories about sunrises and sunsets sound like myths. Eventually, tectonic forces might shift. The planet, no longer held in balance by its rotation, could deform. The oceans would migrate toward the poles, pulled by gravity, toward the now stationary bulges of the equator collapsing inward. Entire coastlines would change. Some nations would be wiped off the map, others formed anew. And still, in this slow apocalypse, people would find a way to sing, to build, to laugh, to remember. That's the beauty of the human spirit. It adapts even in silence, even when the music of the earth's spin has faded into memory. As the world slows, we would discover something profound, that stillness is not the same as peace, and that even when the planet stops spinning our stories, our hopes, our breath, they keep moving forward. Before we imagine what happens when the world stops turning, we have to understand why it turns at all. The Earth's rotation is not a conscious choice, not something it started doing one day because it felt like spinning. It is instead the relic of a violent and chaotic birth, a leftover motion from the very formation of our solar system. Around 4.5 billion years ago, there wasn't a planet at all. Just a swirling, collapsing cloud of gas and dust spiraling around a newborn sun. Gravity did what gravity does. It pulled things inward, clumped matter together, compressed dust into rock and rock into mountains of mass. And in that great collapse, a twist began. The conservation of angular momentum, that same law that makes a spinning figure skater twirl faster when pulling in her arms, applied to entire planets. As Earth's mass contracted, its spin accelerated like a cosmic pirouette, gaining grace with every turn. That spin has never truly stopped. Even now, Earth completes a full rotation every 23 hours, 56 minutes, and 4.1 seconds, what astronomers call a sidereal day. We round it up, of course, because we measure time not by the stars, but by the sun's return to the sky. But in the deep mechanics of the cosmos, the numbers matter. That tiny tilt, the subtle wobble, the precise timing there. What creates seasons, tides, weather? Without rotation, Earth would be unrecognizable, and yet the spin is slowing. Not fast, not noticeably, but measurably. Every century, Earth's rotation slows by about 1.8 milliseconds. That might seem trivial, but over eons, it adds up. 400 million years ago, a day on Earth was only about 21 hours long. When dinosaurs roamed, their sunsets came quicker than ours. This deceleration is largely due to the Moon, Earth's loyal companion. Through tidal friction, tiny gravitational tugs between Earth and the Moon siphons off our planet's energy, ever so gently pulling back on the spin like a celestial brake. It's a quiet dance, ancient and intimate, but it's changing us. If we had no moon, our days would be shorter, our tides weaker, our axial tilt responsible for the seasons less stable. Without that stabilizing presence, Earth's climate might have been wildly erratic, with swings so sharp that complex life could never have taken hold. But because of the moon, because of that gentle drag, Earth has changed slowly, gracefully, allowing life to adapt, to flourish. You might not think of the spin when watching the ocean rise and fall, or when basking in summer light, but it's there in every wave, every gust, every heartbeat. Earth's spin also shapes the planet physically. The centrifugal force, though small, causes the equator to bulge outward slightly. This means Earth is not a perfect sphere, but an oblate spheroid, fatter in the middle, flatter at the poles. Without this spin-induced bulge, the way water pools across the surface would shift. The oceans themselves would redistribute. The spin influences atmospheric currents, too. The Coriolis effect caused by Earth's rotation is what makes storms spin in opposite directions in the northern and southern hemispheres. It's the reason hurricanes spiral. Without it, wind would move straight from high to low pressure, stripping the skies of their swirling poetry. Even flight paths would be different. Pilots account for Earth's rotation when planning long-distance travel. The rotation helps launch rockets into orbit, leveraging the eastward spin to gain extra velocity. In essence, The Earth's spin is woven into everything we do, from the way trees grow, to the rhythms of migration in birds, to the shape of cloud formations. Remove it, or even slow it, and everything changes. But here's where it becomes truly awe-inspiring. Earth's rotation isn't just a physical motion, it's a cosmic inheritance. Other planets spin too. Jupiter spins so fast that its day is less than 10 hours long, causing it to bulge at the equator even more dramatically than Earth. Venus spins so slowly and in the opposite direction that one of its days is longer than its year. Mars, our reddish neighbor, has a day just slightly longer than ours, about 24.6 hours. A delightful coincidence that has captured the imaginations of scientists and dreamers alike. But only Earth has this particular balance, this delicate harmony between speed and stability. It's fast enough to avoid gravitational collapse, slow enough to allow weather systems to stabilize tilted just enough to create seasons without wild extremes. It's just right. Some call this the Goldilocks condition, not too fast, not too slow. And in that just rightness life took root. The first bacteria rose in tidal pools shaped by the moon's pull. Plants learned to follow the sun's arc across the sky. Humans much later told time by shadows and stars planting and harvesting in rhythm with the sky. The spin became part of our biology. We wake, we sleep, we eat at certain times. We feel jet lag when those rhythms are disrupted. The Earth doesn't just spin beneath us, we spin with it inside and out. Our hearts beat in time with the world turning. Which is why the idea of that spin stopping isn't just a physics problem. It's a crisis of identity, a collapse of the deepest rhythms of existence. But tonight, we're not there yet. Tonight, we're still spinning, still caught in the ancient waltz begun in a dusty cradle of stardust and gravity. And maybe knowing that as you drift into sleep, you'll feel a little more connected to the quiet turn beneath you. You are part of a planet that has never stopped dancing. If the Earth were to stop spinning not gradually, not gently, but suddenly, all at once, then, for just 1 second, everything on the surface of the planet would experience a force so violent, so cataclysmic, that it would reshape the world in an instant. The numbers are staggering. At the equator, Earth spins at approximately 1,670 kilometers per hour. Every building, tree, mountain, animal, and drop of water is moving with it. But this movement is invisible because we're all moving together. If that motion were to stop, immediately everything not firmly anchored to the bedrock would continue flying eastward at full speed. You wouldn't even have time to scream. Cities would shatter like porcelain. Glass would burst from windows. Buildings would crumble under their own momentum. Skyscrapers not designed to withstand sudden lateral forces of that magnitude would buckle. Cars, buses, even entire trains would be hurled forward. It wouldn't feel like a jolt. It would feel like the world itself tore away from underneath your feet. The air wouldn't stop either. The atmosphere is also spinning with the Earth. If the ground stopped but the atmosphere didn't, a massive wall of wind would roar across the surface. Hurricane force multiplied by 10. A planet-wide windstorm traveling at over 1,000 miles per hour would rip through everything. Forests would be flattened. Oceans would leap out of their basins, creating towering mega-tsunamis that would devastate coastlines with unimaginable force. These waves wouldn't be localized. They would race across the planet, meeting each other in the interiors of continents, swallowing cities, mountains, and lakes. Every aircraft in the sky, still carrying momentum, would suddenly find the ground rushing up at impossible angles. Satellites would be torn from their expected paths, communications severed. Anything in orbit dependent on a spinning Earth would become chaotic debris. Even underground infrastructure pipelines, subways, bunkers would rupture from the shock waves of global inertia. The tectonic plates, no longer supported by rotational energy and Coriolis balance, might begin to shift in strange, unpredictable ways. Earthquakes wouldn't be isolated incidents anymore. They would be global convulsions, like the planet having a seizure. The crust would crack, magma would surge upward, volcanoes would erupt with no warning. Mountains might collapse under their own shifting weight. Rivers would redirect, entire landscapes would erase themselves. But there's another layer to this moment gravity. Technically, we wouldn't fly off the planet because gravity would still be holding us down. However, the sudden stop would still fling everything eastward, not into space, but along the surface, skimming, tumbling, grinding. And because the Earth bulges at the equator due to its spin stopping, that spin would cause the shape of the Earth to slowly deform. Over time, the equatorial bulge would settle inward, redistributing oceans toward the poles, flooding regions that have never known the sea, and exposing ancient seafloors near the equator. But even that process begins with this first second, the second everything unravels. There would be no warning, no sirens, no time to say goodbye, just motion, then violence, then silence. And yet, amid this violent chaos, there would be eerie beauty. The skies would be filled with debris, swirling clouds of dust and ash glowing red in the fading sunlight. The horizon would blur as the Earth's surface buckled and broke. For a brief moment, the whole planet would feel like it was exhaling, releasing billions of years of stored momentum. For those not instantly lost in the catastrophe, survival would become a desperate, breathless miracle. Some might find themselves buried in collapsed buildings, others adrift in water where land used to be. Electricity grids would fail, nuclear plants would melt down, the fabric of civilization stitched delicately together over centuries would rip in one fatal motion. In that single second, the very concept of normal would vanish. The world would become ancient again, untamed, primal, elemental. And yet, if anyone survived long enough to look around, they might notice strange and subtle changes. The stars, normally wheeling gently across the night sky, would now sit frozen in place. With Earth's rotation gone, day and night would no longer follow their familiar rhythm. The side of Earth that faced the sun at the moment of the stop would begin to bake under its unending light, while the opposite hemisphere plunged into darkness and cold. Time as humans understand it measured by shadows, the arc of the sun. The ticking of clocks would fracture. Day and night would become fixed zones, and it all starts in that first second, that impossible second where the Earth betrays its own motion. If you could pause and observe it frame by frame, you would see a world being peeled apart, oceans rising like monstrous walls, mountains shivering, trees bending like blades of grass in a hurricane, people lifted from their feet, whole cities pushed forward as if caught in an invisible wave. The aftermath wouldn't just be physical. The psychological trauma of witnessing the planet tear itself open would scar the minds of any survivors. The sky wouldn't look the same. The horizon would feel wrong. The silence after the violence, so deep, so complete, might be more haunting than the chaos itself. No birdsong, no traffic, just wind and fire and the hum of a world trying to remember how to stand still. And even if you knew it was coming, even if you had a bunker or a warning system or all the science in the world, nothing could prepare you for that second. Because that second would be the moment Earth stops being Earth. It would become something else entirely, a shell of its former self, a planet without rhythm, without motion. And in that stillness, a terrifying quiet would settle, a quiet so deep it would echo in your bones. That's the cost of stopping a planet. 1 second, and nothing is ever the same again. In the moment after Earth's spin grinds to a halt, something ancient wakes up. Not a beast, not a being, but a kind of wild memory hidden in water and wind. The oceans have always known motion. They are born from it, shaped by the spin, tugged by the moon, pushed by the pulse of equatorial heat and polar cold. But now, without that spin, their rhythm is broken. And in its place comes something darker. First, the atmosphere, thin, transparent, often forgotten, becomes the weapon. It doesn't stop just because the ground does. The air keeps moving at over 1,000 miles per hour, racing eastward, colliding with everything in its path. Skyscrapers, forests, mountains, even entire ranges of hills are sandblasted by wind more violent than any hurricane ever recorded. Trees bend until they snap. Cars are lifted like leaves. Birds are shredded in mid-flight. The air isn't just moving fast, it's ripping forward with the force of 1 billion engines. And this wind, this invisible monster starts to scrape across the surface of the oceans. It pulls waves up like claws, stacking water into towers that should not exist. These aren't tsunamis in the usual sense. They're mega tsunamis born not from earthquakes, but from the very inertia of the sea. Imagine a wall of water hundreds of meters high surging over coastlines, swallowing islands, crashing through cities far inland. Saltwater floods deserts. Coral reefs are smashed against cliffs. Harbors vanish in seconds. The sea forgets where it belongs. And then comes the rain. Torrents of moisture ripped from the oceans, flung high into the sky by the chaos below, condense and fall in endless sheets. Not the gentle kind of rain you might listen to as you fall asleep, but a horizontal rain, driven by winds that flay flesh and carve stone. Floods follow. Rivers overflow before anyone can see the clouds. Drainage systems fail instantly. Cities become submerged tombs. Entire regions transform into lakes. Meanwhile, in the atmosphere's higher layers, everything starts to break down. The jet stream's fast-flowing air currents that help regulate temperature and weather become unstable, then collapse. Without the Coriolis effect, which is driven by Earth's rotation, these currents lose their shape. They wander aimlessly like torn ribbons in a storm, no longer steering weather systems, but allowing chaos to reign. Weather stops following predictable patterns. Storms don't move, they linger. A cyclone that would normally travel hundreds of kilometers now sits motionless over a region spinning slowly in place, like a beast caught in a cage. It rains for weeks, then months, and then it dries. Suddenly, completely, because the new Earth no longer balances heat and cold the way it once did. The sun-facing side begins to cook. With no rotation to spread warmth, the heat concentrates. Temperatures soar beyond what human skin can tolerate. Asphalt bubbles. Forests ignite. The oceans begin to evaporate. Clouds balloon into monstrous anvils, high and thick and glowing with a strange pale light. But these clouds don't drift. They stay fixed in the same skies, casting endless shadow over the lands below. And below, the air grows heavier, hotter. Moisture clings to the lungs. Breathing feels like inhaling soup. On the night side, the opposite horror takes shape. Temperatures plummet. The absence of sunlight stretches on for days, then weeks, then forever. The wind still screams, but now it carries ice crystals. The rain becomes snow, then hail, then silence. Oceans begin to freeze. Frost creeps over everything. Roads, forests, windows, even the breath of survivors still struggling to understand what has happened. Cities once bustling with warmth and noise become frozen sculptures, locked in a perpetual midnight. And between these two hells, the burning and the freezing lies, a narrow band, a liminal space where day and night kiss, but never overlap. It is the only region where life has a chance to adapt. But even here, the sky is a battlefield. The chaotic meeting of hot and cold, of pressure, high and low, creates a wall of storms, a permanent tempest that circles the globe at the twilight edge. Lightning flashes day and night. Thunder rolls without pause. Tornadoes form not as freak events, but as permanent features twisting like sky serpents across a scarred and confused landscape. In this storm belt, weather no longer serves life, it becomes life. Survivors who find refuge here speak of the sky as if it were alive. It groans, it weeps, it rages, and yet somehow it keeps the world breathing. Because beyond this band on either side, death reigns by fire or by frost. And so humanity clings to the storm. Above it all, the sky begins to change color. With the jet streams gone, pollutants and volcanic ash hang in place, staining the heavens in shades of brown and blood orange. The stars grow dim. The moon, still circling us faithfully, appears lopsided and unfamiliar. Its phases frozen, its light twisted by a broken atmosphere. Even the auroras, once beautiful curtains of green light near the poles, now snake across strange latitudes, unleashed by a disturbed magnetosphere. And beneath that sky, the oceans continue their fury. With no tides to cleanse them, with currents destroyed, they grow stagnant. Oxygen levels drop, marine life suffocates, coral reefs bleach and die, fish populations collapse, and yet the sea keeps moving slowly, now no longer directed by planetary spin, but by the dying breath of heat differentials and lunar drag. Massive gyres form in strange places, circulating debris, algae, and the wreckage of the world that once was. Ships drift without purpose. Ports have become flooded ruins. There is no more global trade. The oceans, once highways of civilization, are now haunted places. But perhaps the strangest part of all is the silence that comes after the storm. When the winds finally calm, if they do, the air feels thick, uncertain. Survivors may step outside and listen for the sound of birds or rustling leaves, but there is none. The fury has passed, but it has left behind a stillness that hums with unease. It is in that silence that people begin to realize the earth has not simply changed. It has awakened a side of itself that has never been seen in human history. The oceans and the sky, once caretakers of balance, have become wild, angry forces that no longer answer to gravity or rotation or human understanding. They are rewriting the rules. And we are learning to listen again. The Earth's crust has always been in motion. Even when the world feels solid beneath our feet, it is not. It floats, rests like a cracked eggshell atop a sea of molten rock. We call these fragments tectonic plates, and they drift slowly, inching past and into one another, forming mountains, opening oceans, and shaking the ground with quiet fury. But this motion is delicate, governed by heat from the mantle, and balanced in part by the spin of the planet. When the Earth stops spinning, this fragile balance collapses. The first moments are chaos. When the surface of the Earth suddenly halts while the molten interior continues to churn, the crust begins to slip. Not gracefully, not gradually. It shears, cracks, tears. The continents themselves, enormous rafts of ancient rock, lurch forward before grinding to a tortured halt. Mountain ranges buckle, entire regions split apart. Fault lines that were once dormant awaken with ferocity. Earthquakes roar across every continent, not one or two at a time, but thousands all at once. There is no longer a ring of fire. Now the entire planet is aflame with motion. Skyscrapers crumble like sandcastles. Bridges twist and snap. The ground opens without warning, swallowing cities, forests, coastlines. Roads ripple like waves. Pipelines rupture. Subways flood. The earth moans beneath itself, and the sound carries for hundreds of miles, a deep, inhuman groan that seems to rise from the very bones of the planet. In some places, entire mountain ranges collapse. Their foundations no longer stable crack beneath their own weight. Landslides the size of cities pour down valleys, burying everything in their path. In others, new mountains rise, forced upward by colliding plates now moving in directions no longer guided by rotation. Volcanoes awaken en masse. With pressure building and no rotational momentum to distribute heat, magma surges upward with terrifying speed. Entire chains of volcanoes, many thought extinct, erupt simultaneously, painting the skies in ash and fire. Lava rivers carve through farmland, forests, and towns. The sun, if visible at all, becomes a red, blurred eye behind a veil of smoke and volcanic soot. And the ash doesn't just darken the skies, it cools the atmosphere. Sunlight struggles to reach the ground. Temperatures drop. Crops fail again, not from heat this time, but from sudden unseasonal cold. A volcanic winter begins to take shape. Meanwhile, the shape of the Earth itself begins to deform. The centrifugal force from Earth's spin once pushed the equator outward, giving our planet a slight bulge. Without that force, the planet begins to relax, to settle into a more perfect sphere. But the mass of water, rock, and crust at the equator doesn't simply slide into place. It crashes. Slowly, with unstoppable momentum, land masses sink. Some regions, once highlands, descend into new basins. Others near the poles begin to rise as the redistribution of mass alters gravitational balance. This global readjustment doesn't happen evenly. The crust stretches in some areas and compresses in others, leading to newly formed rift valleys and mountain uplifts. Ancient fault lines shift, new ones form, the very map of the world begins to blur, familiar coastlines vanish. Inland seas emerge, islands once perched above the waterline are lost beneath rising waves, others emerge suddenly like the earth exhaling new land. GPS systems become useless, borders drawn by humans no longer match the land beneath them. Countries disappear, new continents malformed and wild begin to take shape. Underground, the consequences are just as profound. The mantle, still spinning slightly with residual momentum, rubs violently against the now stationary crust. This generates friction heat in massive, unexpected bursts. In some places, the ground steams. Geysers erupt in regions that never had geothermal activity. Sinkholes open beneath cities, swallowing entire blocks in a matter of minutes. Underground caverns collapse. Faults begin to slip not just horizontally, but vertically. Massive chunks of earth rise or drop dozens of meters overnight. Rail systems and infrastructure buried underground twist into useless ruin. In this shifting nightmare, the magnetosphere, Earth's protective magnetic field, is destabilized. Normally generated by the spinning of the liquid outer core, this field shields us from solar radiation. But now, with the motion gone or disrupted, the field begins to weaken. Patches of the Earth become exposed to intense solar and cosmic radiation. The auroras dance in strange places, glowing eerily above equatorial skies. Compass needles spin aimlessly. Birds, whales, and other animals that rely on Earth's magnetic field for migration lose their way, moving in confused spirals, beaching themselves or vanishing entirely. In human societies, nothing remains the same. Architecture once built to withstand regional earthquakes or seasonal weather now faces unrelenting global stress. Entire cities are abandoned, not because they were destroyed, but because the land beneath them refuses to stay still. Highways stretch uselessly into collapsed ravines, rivers change direction. The ruins of civilization are not just buried, they're shifted, fractured, scattered. Cultural heritage sites, temples, pyramids, ancient cities are torn apart. Some vanish beneath new lakes. Others are split in half by growing canyons. It's as if the earth, having held them for millennia, no longer remembers where they belonged. And in the aftermath, a new reality begins to take hold, that the ground is no longer something we can trust. Even those who survive the initial devastation live in constant motion. The earth doesn't roar anymore. It murmurs, creaks, sighs. The soil vibrates faintly always. You feel it beneath your feet, a reminder that the crust has not settled, that it is still shifting, still unsure. And above it all, the sky watches silently, no longer spinning overhead, but simply present, eternal, as the land below it rearranges itself into a world both familiar and impossibly new. When people think of a city, they often imagine permanence. Towers of glass and steel rising proudly into the sky, streets laid out in perfect grids, bridges stretching across rivers, lights glowing through windows like constellations pulled down to earth. Cities feel eternal, anchored safe. But cities are fragile. They are built for a spinning world, for calm skies, for gravity as we know it. When the earth stops spinning even for a moment, that illusion shatters. The wind comes first. It doesn't whisper. It screams. The atmosphere, still carrying its momentum, tears across the surface at over 1,000 miles per hour. This isn't a breeze. It's a wall of force, invisible and unstoppable. And cities, with all their proud geometry, are not prepared. Skyscrapers, those glass and steel symbols of civilization, begin to sway. Most are built to handle wind, but not this wind. Their foundations twist, facades explode, entire floors collapse inward. Some buildings tilt, groan, then fall sideways in slow, terrifying arcs. Glass rains down like glittering ash. Elevators snap loose inside shafts and plummet. Whole structures disintegrate not because of any fault in design, but because no architect had imagined the planet itself stopping beneath them. Smaller buildings, Homes, schools, hospitals fare no better. Roofs are peeled off like pages from a book. Walls collapse inward. Vehicles are hurled down streets, tumbling, slamming into each other. Buses lift off the ground like toys. Traffic lights whip and snap their poles bent flat against the pavement. Airplanes parked at airports become projectiles. Their wings crack, their bodies flip end over end, crashing into terminals or tumbling across runways like giant spinning coins. Jets that were airborne when the stop occurred struggle to stabilize if they can at all. Most plummet caught between the sky and a ground that no longer behaves. And the wind doesn't care. It presses on, flattening entire city blocks, blowing out windows with soundless violence, scouring streets until they are stripped bare, cars gone, trees gone, signs twisted and unreadable. The wind doesn't howl. It roars like an ancient thing long imprisoned and newly freed. The sound is deafening. Beyond sound, it vibrates in the chest, in the bones. It leaves silence behind, not the peaceful kind, but the hollow quiet of things broken. Underground, the destruction is just as cruel. Subway tunnels collapse as the crust above shifts and shakes. Trains derail, trapped in darkness. Water mains burst. Gas lines rupture. Fires begin, fed by winds too fast to fight. Flames spread without direction, blazing across rooftops, then disappearing as easily as they came. And yet, the air still moves. It scours the rubble, lifts dust and glass and fragments of lives into the sky. Office papers from broken towers flutter upward and vanish. Family photographs, menus from restaurants, children's drawings, receipts, all carried away on wind that doesn't stop. Above the skyline dissolves what once defined a city. The architecture, the symmetry, the silhouette is gone. Landmarks disappear. Churches crushed. Museums torn open. Stadiums folded like fabric. The bones of the city lie exposed. Rubble piles up in strange places where the wind dropped it. Debris is scattered hundreds of miles away. A lamp from Tokyo turns up in the forest outside Vladivostok. A broken taxi from Sao Paulo drifts into the mountains of Argentina. The cities are coming apart. But what's more unsettling is what remains standing. Some buildings, by chance or miracle, survive, but they are not spared. They are empty, haunted. Their windows stare out over a landscape no longer recognizable. Inside, the silence is total. Desks abandoned, coffee still warm, screens flickering static, elevators frozen mid-floor. Cities that were once full of movement and light become mausoleums. Time stops inside them just as it did outside. Survivors, if there are any, move through the wreckage like ghosts. They do not speak. The wind has stolen language. They do not cry. The sound would be swallowed. They search for others, for shelter, for meaning. But cities offer none. There are no sirens, no emergency broadcasts, no power. Satellites in orbit are misaligned. The networks are silent. No help is coming. The skyline, once a symbol of progress, now casts only long, jagged shadows. And yet there is a strange kind of beauty here. As the wind calms, as the dust begins to settle, something soft emerges. Vines creep over fallen concrete. Birds, confused, lost circle the shattered towers. The sun rises over a fractured cityscape, casting golden light through empty steel frames. Nature does not mourn the loss of steel and glass. It simply returns. Grass pushes through pavement. Trees grow in parking lots. Rivers change course, flowing over sidewalks. The earth reclaims what stood still too long. And in this quiet, survivors may begin again, not in the image of the old cities, but in new forms. Smaller, closer to the ground, buildings that bend with the wind instead of defying it, shelters that honor the sky's unpredictability instead of ignoring it. A new kind of civilization born not from defiance, but from humility. Because when the world stopped turning, the cities tried to stand tall. But the wind reminded them gently, then violently, that nothing built on speed can survive stillness. And now in the rubble, a different kind of resilience grows. On a spinning earth, time is movement. The rising sun, the falling dusk, the the shadows that stretch and shrink. These are how we mark our days, how we measure our lives. But when the earth stops, turning time breaks. Not the ticking of clocks or the mathematics of seconds, but the felt time, the rhythm that lives in the skin, the bones, the breath. On one side of the planet, the sun freezes in the sky. It hangs there motionless, neither rising nor setting, blazing down on a landscape that can no longer blink. The concept of noon becomes meaningless. There is no progression, no relief, just heat, constant, growing, oppressive. The sun does not move, it stares. Shadows don't slide across the ground anymore. They are painted in place forever, pointing in the same direction. Flowers that once followed the arc of light now wither, confused, turning in circles like sleepwalkers. Animals stop their usual patterns. Birds don't sing at dawn. There is no dawn. Humans too begin to unravel. Our biology is tuned to light and darkness. Hormones rise and fall with the sun. Sleep waits for the dark. Alertness comes with the light. But now those signals are lost. On the day side, people begin to suffer from a strange exhaustion, a weariness that no amount of rest can undo. They sleep with blankets over their heads in basements behind blackout curtains, but still the light finds them. It creeps in. It burns into the eyes, the mind, the soul. Children cry without understanding why. Adults lose track of hours of meals of memory. Their skin blisters. Their moods fracture. Even timekeepers, scientists, with atomic clocks struggle to explain what a day now means. There is no sunrise to start it, no sunset to end it. Only the relentless sun, always overhead and always hungry. On the night side, the opposite horror unfolds. The stars freeze in place. Orion does not march across the winter sky. The moon stops its slow dance. There is no dusk, no twilight, only the same unchanging blackness. People light fires not for warmth, but to remember the idea of light. Crops fail, photosynthesis requires the sun. Trees drop their leaves prematurely, then never regrow them. Entire forests become skeletal, and the cold creeps in, not a sudden sharp winter, but a slow, deep planetary exhale. It begins at the fingertips, then the toes, then the breath. Ice forms on windows, then walls, then the blood itself. People on the dark side speak in whispers as if the silence has weight. Some believe the sun will return, others begin to worship the darkness. In both realms, clocks become irrelevant. Humans try to hold on to the old system's 12-hour days, 7-day weeks. But these structures soon fall apart. What good is a calendar when the sky never changes? New cultures form around fixed light. On the day side, time is measured in shades of brightness, dull, harsh, blinding, white, hot. On the night side, it is measured by shifts in cold, cool, biting, paralyzing, dead. People begin to tell time by their own bodies, how long since sleep, since hunger, since pain. In the twilight zone, the thin strip between day and night, where dusk lingers eternally, things are different. Here, light is soft. The sun hangs low on the horizon forever, neither rising nor setting. Shadows are long and the air feels heavy with silence. It is the only region where time feels almost normal. But even here the illusion cracks. The concept of tomorrow becomes fragile. What is a morning in a world with no dawn? What is tonight when night never comes? Some people try to simulate time. Giant lamps flicker on and off to mimic sunrises. Artificial nights are imposed by underground bunkers. But it never truly works. The body remembers the sky, and the sky no longer moves. As weeks pass, even language shifts. People stop saying, "see you tomorrow." They say, "see you later." Or just, "see you." Birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, all lose their meaning. What is a year after all if you never see the seasons change? On the day side, entire towns move underground. Cities sink into the soil to escape the heat. Mirrors are used to redirect light, trying to create cycles to fake motion. But the sun does not blink. It does not rest. It watches patient and merciless. On the night side, homes become bunkers. Wind turbines freeze. Power grids fail. Survivors rely on fire body heat silence. Communities huddle in caves and forgotten subways in ice-covered ruins. Their days are told by the number of candles burned. And over time, something stranger happens. Perception shifts. The human brain, desperate for rhythm, begins to invent it. People hallucinate sunsets. They believe the sky has changed even when it hasn't. Dreams bleed into waking. Stories become more real than clocks. A new mythology is born. Children are told legends of a spinning earth of skies that changed of mornings and evenings and meals at regular times. These become sacred tales remembered in whispers. A bedtime story from a world that no longer exists. But even myths cannot replace motion. Time without rotation is not time, it's stasis. It is a painting that never dries, a song that never ends. And in that stillness, humanity must choose adapt to this eternal day and night, or slowly forget what it meant to move with the world. On the day side of a planet that no longer spins, the sun does not rise. It does not set. It hovers fixed in place like an open eye that refuses to close. And beneath it, the world begins to change. At first, it is subtle. The mornings seem unusually warm. Grass wilts a little earlier. The air feels thick before noon. But the sun doesn't shift. The light never softens. By the second week, skin burns in minutes. Asphalt becomes sticky underfoot. The breeze once cooling now feels like breath from an oven. Trees drop their leaves. Birds stop singing. The world begins to glow with a bleached intensity washed in permanent midday. Shadows remain frozen. They don't stretch. They don't shrink. They just lie still, like ink spilled across the pavement. And in this stillness, the heat grows relentless. Not because the sun has grown stronger, but because nothing moves, not the earth, not the air, not the light. On a spinning planet, heat is shared, distributed, pulled westward by the rotation and cooled by night. But now nothing relieves the surface. The sun beats down on the same patch of land hour after hour, day after day, without mercy. Temperatures climb past 40 degrees Celsius, then 50, then 60. Deserts spread like oil slicks. Crops curl inward, turning to ash in the fields. Rivers dry up. Lakes shrink. Soil cracks. The ground becomes too hot to touch, then too hot to walk on. People cover their windows with foil. Curtains melt. Fans blow air that feels no cooler than a sigh. Air conditioners run until the power fails. And then there is only the sun. Bodies respond in predictable ways. Sweat pours but brings no relief. Heat stroke comes quickly. Hallucinations follow. The circadian rhythm collapses not just because night never comes, but because melatonin, the hormone that signals sleep, can no longer rise in an environment of endless brightness. People begin to sleep in fragments, a few minutes at a time. Nightmares arrive even during waking hours. Time becomes a blur of heat, hunger, thirst, confusion. Cities respond with desperation. Streets are covered in white paint to reflect sunlight. Greenhouses are buried underground. Tunnels are dug. Some migrate toward the edges of the day zone, chasing cooler air. Others stay and descend into basements, into subways, into the earth itself. And slowly, a new kind of city is born, one that hides from the sky. Life goes on not in towers of glass and steel, but in bunkers, in caves lit with artificial dusk. Parks are replaced by hydroponic farms lit with LEDs. Recreation becomes digital. Exercise is done in underground chambers. Festivals, if they still exist, are held under simulation domes where a fake sun can rise and set again. Children grow up never knowing stars. The outdoors is taught in books. And above them, on the surface, the world continues to bake. Forests combust without lightning. Dry grass sparks into flame with the friction of the wind. The sun becomes more than light. It becomes danger. Skin cancer rates explode. Clothing changes not fashion, but armor heat-reflective suits, breathing masks, goggles tinted against ultraviolet glare. Outdoor workers, once essential, now wear full-body protection for minutes of exposure. Construction halts. Farming retreats underground or disappears. Solar panels begin to fail, not from lack of sun, but from too much. Overheating circuits, melted casings. Infrastructure was never meant for this kind of permanence. And as the temperature rises, oceans begin to respond. Evaporation increases. The air becomes saturated with moisture. Humidity soars to suffocating levels. Rain clouds form, but they don't move. They hang suspended thick and gray, releasing bursts of steam more than rain. And when the rain does come, it's heavy, acidic hot. Storms on the day side aren't relief, they're punishment. Flash floods sweep through streets already cracking from heat. Lightning dances across clear blue skies. Thunder rolls without clouds. The sky becomes a paradox, blinding and boiling, and somehow still beautiful in its horror. In this world, death by heat becomes common. Not dramatic, just quiet. People fall asleep and never wake up. The old, the sick, the isolated. Even the healthy, if they miscalculate hydration by an hour. Entire neighborhoods become silent. Doors swing open in the wind, revealing empty homes. And yet life finds a way to survive. Humans are stubborn. In some regions, people adapt through ritual. Time is marked not by clocks, but by body cues. Meals every 6 internal hours. Sleep with eye masks and sleeping pills. Homes are dug into hillsides. Water is filtered from air. The wealthy build climate-controlled chambers. The poor rely on tradition stone walls, thick curtains, communal shelters. Language changes. Phrases like sunrise and sunset vanish. People speak of the time before the burn, or when the light paused. Myths emerge. Stories of a time when the sun moved, when stars danced, when rain was cool and welcome. Children ask if the sun will ever sleep. Parents don't answer. They sing lullabies in the glow of LED lamps, describing shadows that no longer exist. And in some corners of the day, side art begins to reflect a new reverence, not for the sun as life-giver, but as sovereign. The unblinking God, the ever-present watcher. It's drawn as a single glowing eye framed by fire. Some build altars, others curse it, but all respect it, for it is constant. It is truth. The world may have stopped turning, but the sun still shines. Not kindly, not gently, but endlessly. And as humans adjust, as they learn to build beneath rather than within the light, they begin to ask questions more spiritual than scientific. What is a life without darkness? Can hope exist without shadow? The answers don't come easily, but perhaps buried deep beneath the burning surface, where silence and memory still sleep, the seeds of something softer are waiting. Not to rise, but to endure. There's a place where the sun has forgotten to rise, a place not marked by hours or seasons, but by the long, unchanging stretch of night that never blinks. On this side of the planet, the side that turned away when the earth stopped moving, darkness has become law. It is not the darkness of midnight before dawn. It is deeper, heavier, timeless. The stars overhead are motionless. They do not arc across the sky. Constellations remain fixed like cold holes in the black. The moon, if it appears at all, hangs in place, a frozen eye, casting pale, immobile light over a landscape, growing colder with each passing day. And on the ground below, the world begins to die. Without sunlight, photosynthesis halts. Trees stand still, no longer breathing. Their leaves fall early, but this time they do not return. Forests become skeletons. Grass fades to ash gray, then disappears. The color drains from the world, leaving only shades of silver, blue, and black. Temperatures drop, not sharply, but endlessly. The warmth trapped in the soil begins to bleed away. At first, frost appears on windows, then ice crusts over rivers, lakes, and finally the oceans themselves. Snow falls in fine, soundless layers, settling over rooftops, railways, power lines. Soon, entire cities disappear under its weight. Skyscrapers become pale teeth jutting out of white dunes. Roads vanish, landmarks blur, and beneath the snow, silence settles like a second skin. But cold does not come alone. It changes everything. Machines seize, batteries freeze. Diesel turns to wax. Electricity grids fail, pipes burst, fireplaces crack, plastic becomes brittle. The modern world designed for light warmth movement simply stops working. And in this darkness, people begin to vanish. Some die quietly curled beneath blankets that no longer insulate. Others leave their homes hoping to find help or warmth only to disappear into the snow. Entire towns become frozen tombs preserved in mid-meal, mid-conversation, mid-dream. Time doesn't just stop, it erases. Those who survive do so by descent. They go underground, into mines' basements, subway tunnels, sealed bunkers, places where the cold is slower to reach. Communities gather around generators, around fire, around shared breath. Every calorie matters. Every flicker of heat is sacred. Light becomes currency. A single candle means life. Batteries are hoarded like gold. The sun no longer marks the rhythm of the day, so people learn to measure time by fuel. 1 hour equals one lantern refill. Sleep becomes fragmented. People lose track of whether they're waking at night or day. It no longer matters. The body forgets how to cycle. Minds fray. Dreams become indistinguishable from memory. Children grow up having never seen their own shadow. Outside, the natural world adapts in stranger ways. Animals that once relied on the sun for hunting, mating, migrating begin to vanish. Insects disappear, birds fall silent, fish under frozen lakes starve for oxygen. But in the deep, some creatures endure. Fungi and bacteria that never needed sunlight flourish underground. In geothermal vents, strange ecosystems bloom, microscopic, tenacious, alien. Some humans turn to these places farming warmth like others once farmed wheat. Entire settlements sprout near geothermal springs, volcanic caves, natural insulation. Here, steam is survival. In these places, the language of light changes. People no longer ask, "Is it morning?" They ask, "How many hours since the last flame?" How long until the next bulb dies? Myths shift too. Children are told stories of a golden sky that once burned. They do not believe it. They've never seen blue. Some draw pictures of the sun as a legend, a golden god who once warmed the world but turned its face away. Others reject it entirely, worshiping the cold as truth. There are faiths born in this night rituals of silence, of breath, shared in caves of snow, interpreted like scripture. Whole societies bloom in frozen shadow, reshaping what it means to be alive. But the darkness is not without beauty. The auroras, freed from their poles by a disturbed magnetic field, now dance above strange places. Curtains of green, violet, and crimson shimmer silently over forests of ice. The stars, motionless but sharp, become familiar companions. People name them like old friends. And the moon, when it shows itself, glows with unnatural clarity, its every crater visible, its presence both haunting and holy. Music changes. Sound travels differently through snow. Drums become muffled, replaced by humming, low singing instruments made of metal and breath. Songs are passed orally, echoing softly through tunnels and shelters. They carry history. Comfort memory. Light becomes art, not in color, but in placement. Lamps arranged in patterns, candles placed in sacred geometry. A single beam of light becomes a sculpture. And through it all, hope flickers. People adapt. They build thermal walls, learn to breed crops with artificial light, discover methods of snow filtration, of heat recycling. The world they create is smaller, quieter, but not without joy. In pockets of the long night, laughter still echoes. Meals are still shared. Children still play wrapped in layers, inventing games in the snow. And in this resilience, something ancient stirs, the same force that once taught mammals to hibernate, that pushed early humans into caves that carried fire from one camp to the next. Survival becomes story, and story becomes life. One day, perhaps, this side of Earth will turn again. But for now, in the absence of sunrise, humanity becomes its own light. Dim, fragile, flickering, but warm enough to keep the dark at bay. When the Earth stops spinning, it does not just change what we see, it changes how the air breathes. The sky, once alive with invisible motion, loses its rhythm, and without rhythm, the climate forgets how to dance. On a spinning Earth, everything in the atmosphere moves with purpose. The rotation creates the Coriolis effect, a silent force that bends winds and builds the world's great currents, the jet streams that slice the sky into ribbons, the trade winds that sweep across oceans, the monsoons that come and go like seasonal heartbeat drums. These winds carry heat, moisture, and rain across continents. They guide hurricanes and shape the very texture of the clouds. But without spin, the Coriolis effect vanishes. The sky loses its shape. Winds no longer curve, they collapse. Jet streams stutter, then dissolve. The great conveyor belts of air that once flowed with elegant precision begin to meander aimlessly like rivers breaking their banks. At first, the stillness seems almost peaceful. In some places, the wind dies entirely. The trees no longer sway. The air hangs like thick velvet. But peace is an illusion. Without motion, heat builds in strange places. Moisture lingers where it shouldn't. Pressure systems grow bloated and unanchored. Rain clouds hover in place for days, then weeks, drenching the same land until it drowns. Other regions wait for rain that never comes, their skies clear but cruel. Droughts stretch over landscapes that once flourished. Deserts expand like spreading ink. Farmlands crack open. Rivers run backwards or vanish. Crops rot in wetness or wither in dust. The monsoons, once clockwork in their arrival, now arrive too early, or too late, or not at all. In South Asia, the ground bakes under weeks of relentless sun, then floods overnight when a stalled cyclone dumps an ocean's worth of rain in one place. In Central Africa, the Sahel no longer breathes between dry and wet seasons. It forgets how to transition. And in the American Midwest, the clash between cold and warm air, masses becomes unpredictable birthing superstorms that appear without warning and linger long past reason. Storms no longer move, they swell. A hurricane that once took days to cross the Gulf of Mexico now sits motionless, turning the sea into a slow, churning cauldron. The eye of the storm is no longer a passage, it's a prison. These storms feed themselves cycling heat, upward, drawing moisture from below, deepening in intensity until their very cores begin to deform. Tornadoes rise from the edges of these weather beasts not in ones or twos, but in flocks. Some last for hours, some never fully dissipate. They circle ruined towns like curious predators. And in the places where the air has gone, still new dangers emerge. Without wind, the air becomes heavy with pollutants. Cities become choking bowls of carbon smog and heat. The sky turns amber. Eyes burn. Breathing becomes shallow. People retreat indoors not from storms, but from the weight of invisible poisons. Asthma becomes common. Lung disease spreads. Children grow up under filtered domes, never feeling the breeze. Wildfires, once seasonal, now burn without end. Not driven by wind, but by fuel and thirst. Forests on the edge of dry zones become tinder fields. A single spark and the flame spreads slowly but inevitably. Smoke hangs in the air for weeks. Rain doesn't come to wash it away. There is no weather to end it, just the fire and the waiting. In the polar regions, the chaos continues. The lack of wind means less mixing of warm and cold air. The boundaries between climates sharpen. The line between temperate and frozen becomes razor thin. On one side, heat waves melt ancient glaciers. On the other, frost returns with terrifying speed. Permafrost thaws, releasing methane. The air grows stranger thicker. The greenhouse gas builds invisibly, accelerating warming not through storms, but through silence. Climate scientists try to make sense of it, but the models break. Forecasting relies on rotation. Without it, even the algorithms get lost. Predictions become poetry, vague lyrical guesses about how the sky might behave tomorrow. People turn to folk wisdom, to signs in the trees, to the way animals move, to stories passed down in whispers. If the sun is too still, they say you must dig a well. If the birds fly nowhere, the rain has forgotten its name. Migration patterns vanish. Birds stay put or vanish. Fish no longer follow seasonal currents. Coral reefs confused by stagnant waters begin to bleach and collapse. Jellyfish swarm. Algae blooms suffocate entire coasts. The oceans themselves are caught in the same paralysis. Without wind to drive surface movement, the great gyres slow. Currents like the Gulf Stream falter. Warm water pools in strange places. Cold water becomes trapped in corners of the sea. The ocean's once blue highways of motion become vast, chaotic, still pools. And under these skies, human societies shift. Farmers abandon traditional planting seasons. They grow crops indoors, or underground, or not at all. Cities build weather-controlled domes, massive bubbles of synthetic sky. Some retreat to highlands where storms can't linger. Others seek refuge in the narrow twilight belt where the winds are erratic but survivable. Language changes again. No one says it's going to rain. They say, the sky is thinking, the air has mood, the clouds are hungry. Weather is no longer something you watch, it is something you live inside. You feel it on the tongue, in the lungs, behind the eyes. It becomes a constant presence, shapeless, timeless, wild. But perhaps the most haunting part of this new world is not the violence of the storms or the silence of the stillness. It is the sense that the sky has forgotten us. That, without rotation, the earth has lost its dialogue with the heavens. The air no longer answers. The clouds no longer move toward or away. They simply hover, breathing slow, like something asleep and dreaming of another planet. And we, small and fragile, must learn to live in that dream. There is something you've never seen, never touched, never smelled, but it's always been there, wrapping the earth in silence. A magnetic cocoon, a shield that reaches out into space, deflecting invisible danger, filtering the fury of the sun into soft dancing lights at the poles. The magnetosphere, born from the slow churn of molten metals deep inside Earth's core, is our planet's first defense against the cosmos. But when the Earth stops spinning, that shield begins to dissolve. The magnetic field exists because the Earth rotates. The outer core, composed of liquid iron and nickel, spins and flows, creating electric currents that generate the field, like a dynamo humming inside a steel globe. But if the rotation halts, that fluid motion weakens, the dynamo sputters, and the field begins to decay. Not instantly, but relentlessly. The poles, which already drift and flip on geological timescales, now become unstable. North and south are no longer fixed magnetic. North wanders erratically like a compass needle trapped in a dream. Then the field weakens, year by year, layer by layer, until finally it begins to break. And what was once protection becomes a sieve. The solar wind, a stream of charged particles from the sun, no longer curves gently around us. It crashes head-on. On the sunlit side of the Earth, the consequences are immediate. Satellites in low Earth orbit begin to fail. Their circuits fry, their surfaces erode. GPS communication weather systems all begin to stutter, then vanish. Spacecraft go silent. High-frequency radio signals bend strangely, then drop. The skies above cities, once calm, now buzz faintly with interference. Power grids falter not from overload, but from invisible storms carried on waves of plasma. Transformers explode. Entire regions lose electricity without warning. Even underground cables hum with static. Auroras bloom not just at the poles, but across latitudes where they've never been seen. In Brazil, in Egypt, in Indonesia, glowing curtains of green, purple, and red stretch across the night sky, silent and surreal. Beautiful, yes, but ominous, because the auroras mean the field is thin, and through those cracks radiation pours in. Cosmic rays, gamma bursts. Particles that once deflected now pierce the atmosphere with ease. Airplanes flying at high altitudes become vulnerable. Pilots receive unexpected doses of radiation. Frequent flyers begin to show symptoms previously reserved for nuclear technicians. Cancer rates climb. Skin begins to burn faster even under cloud cover. The ozone already weakened by human industry cannot shield us from the ultraviolet deluge. On the ground, DNA unravels quietly. Cells mutate. Some die. Some divide uncontrollably. Children are born with conditions no one can explain. Insects, birds, and other magnetosensitive species lose their orientation. Monarch butterflies never reach Mexico. Pigeons circle endlessly. Whales beach themselves on unfamiliar shores. Turtles fail to hatch. The natural symphony of movement, a choreography written in magnetic lines, is scrambled. And below in the soil, even seeds hesitate. Some plants tuned subtly to geomagnetic cues falter. Germination patterns shift. Crop yields fall. Farmers speak of ghost seasons when the land feels wrong, even when the rain and sun seem right. Meanwhile, in the polar regions where the field was weakest to begin with, the radiation hits hardest. Ice melts not just from above, but from within. Frozen microbes, long dormant, begin to wake. Some are harmless, others are not. Viruses, ancient alien to modern immunity, begin to emerge. What was once locked away by time is now airborne. Virologists warn of strains for which we have no defense. On the societal level, confidence cracks. Space agencies can no longer launch safely. Solar panels degrade faster than they can be replaced. Hospitals struggle with imaging technology. MRI machines that depend on stable magnetism glitch and stall. Compasses become ornaments. Pilots and sailors must relearn celestial navigation. Even digital compasses embedded in phones begin to spin or fail. And through it all, the atmosphere changes character. High above, charged particles create currents in the ionosphere. These, in turn, feed back into the ground. Sensitive instruments used in science, in defense, in infrastructure give false readings. Earthquake detectors cry wolf. Missile alert systems flicker. Nuclear early warning radars go blind or worse, trigger by mistake. A simple magnetic storm, once rare, now becomes a rolling global event. But the damage is not only technological, it is psychological. For the first time in millennia, humans feel exposed not just to nature, but to the universe. There is no longer a roof, no invisible wall, no guardian field. The idea that space is dangerous becomes visceral. Ancient fears, long buried, resurface. The stars, once beautiful, now feel intrusive. The night sky becomes unsettling in its clarity. Myths reform. In some places, people speak of the sky as angry. In others, of the earth withdrawing her protection. New cults emerge, those who bury electronics, those who wear metal to anchor the soul, those who worship the auroras as messages from something greater. But amid the fear, science presses on. Underground labs study materials that resist radiation. New shielding technologies emerge. Some propose artificial magnetic fields, orbital generators, satellite-based dynamos. Others retreat. Underground cities, shielded caves, domed biomes. Civilization begins to split between those who embrace the storm and those who dig away from it. And always above the sky continues to shimmer, silent, charged, watching. What we once thought was permanent has proved fragile. The Earth's magnetic field was never a given. It was a gift. And now, without spin, the gift is fading. Not with fire or explosion, but with light. A light we were never meant to see, so close. There's something sacred between us and the stars, a thin veil, a protective breath. The atmosphere, for all its vastness, is remarkably fragile, just a skin of gases holding back a universe that doesn't care whether we live or die. Within that skin lies an even thinner layer, the ozone floating high above, invisible, silent, and essential. It shields us from the sun's most violent touch. Without it, light becomes a weapon. And as the Earth stops spinning, the atmosphere begins to crack. At first it is not obvious. The air still feels the same. We still breathe. But far above, under the constant motionless stare of the sun, chemistry starts to change. The ozone layer, already weakened by decades of pollution, finds itself under siege. Without the circulation caused by planetary rotation, the stratosphere becomes stagnant. No more wind to mix the gases, no more flow to repair damage. What was once self-healing becomes still. Sunlight, unrelenting and fixed over one half of the planet, continues to break ozone molecules apart. Normally, these molecules would be replenished by natural cycles reformed by reactions in the upper air, but those cycles depended on movement. Without motion, repair slows, damage accumulates, and then the holes appear. Not small ones, not seasonal gaps, but massive wounds in the sky stretching like bruises across the atmosphere. Through them pours radiation, UVB, UVC. Wavelengths of light, too short, too sharp, too cruel for life. On the day side of the planet under that still, merciless sun, the surface begins to burn. Not fire, not flame, but cellular burn. DNA unraveling, skin blistering, eyes clouding, plants shrivel in minutes. The green of the world fades into sickly yellow, then brittle brown. Grasslands vanish. Forests blacken not from heat, but from light. The leaves curl inward as if trying to hide from the sky. Flowers never bloom. Seeds refuse to sprout. Insects die off en masse. Bees lose their way. Butterflies vanish. Frogs, whose thin skins make them vulnerable to radiation, begin to disappear. Ponds fall silent. The food chain groans. And at the top of it, humans. The air is still breathable. But the light is not survivable. People stop going outside during the day, not because of temperature, but because the sun has become toxic. A 5-minute walk results in sunburn. A 10-minute stroll becomes a rash. 20 minutes and the skin begins to peel. Ultraviolet rays dig deep, not just into flesh, but into the cells themselves. Cancers bloom. Immune systems falter. Eyes become sensitive. Sunglasses evolve into armor. Clothes become reflective, layered heat-repellent radiation blocking. Cities shift to a nocturnal rhythm. Schools open after dusk. Work begins at midnight. Recreation moves underground. Playgrounds are covered in thick, UV-filtering glass. Tunnels replace sidewalks. The urban surface becomes a ghost town by daylight. Some buildings install artificial skies domes that mimic clouds and sunsets, feeding the illusion of a sky that no longer exists. Meanwhile, the oceans begin to change. UV rays penetrate water too, plankton. Tiny, drifting architects of the food web start to die. Coral reefs already stressed bleach and collapse. Fisheries fail. Seabirds vanish. Whale song fades. The sea loses its voice. The skies above the oceans turn strange. The air becomes warmer, thicker, but no longer holds the usual cloud forms. Evaporation accelerates, but the clouds that rise form slowly, asymmetrically. Rain becomes infrequent and violent. Droughts stretch, then break with sudden downpours that flood barren land. Soil, scorched by light, loses its cohesion. Crops cannot take root. Dust storms rise red and choking. People begin to speak of the sun not as a star, but as a threat. It's no longer revered, it's avoided. Worship turns into fear. In some regions, societies build sky vaults, huge enclosed cities with mirrored ceilings that reflect harmful rays, allowing simulated daylight filtered through layers of gas and water. These vaults become sanctuaries, but also prisons. The people inside no longer know what the sky truly looks like. They live under projected clouds, artificial weather, plastic birds. They hear recordings of wind rustling leaves, but have never felt it. The outside world, by contrast, becomes myth. Children born into vaults ask if the stories are true of real stars, of grass underfoot, of walking barefoot on sand, without screaming. Meanwhile, on the planet's night side, whispers of hope travel. There, shielded from the sun, life remains raw cold but unburned. Some migrate toward the twilight line, hoping to settle where light is dim enough to survive, but warm enough to grow. This twilight belt becomes a contested land. Borders blur. Settlements rise overnight. Wars erupt not over oil or water, but for shadow the precious sliver between incineration and frostbite. And yet some choose to adapt rather than run. Bioengineers begin working on UV-resistant crops, animals, even humans. Melanin-enhancing therapies, DNA repair drugs, light-filtering contact lenses that allow people to walk briefly beneath the naked sun. Evolution accelerated by necessity, but even adaptation has limits. Above the clouds, those thin, high clouds that still dare to float the ozone continues to thin. The auroras, once beautiful, now bleed into the day sky. Green and purple ripples shimmer at noon. They are no longer a sign of wonder. They are a warning. The sky is bleeding, and Earth, once vibrant and alive, now wears its wounds on high. It is a reminder that life never thrived here by accident. It was nurtured, protected, held in balance. And now, with that balance gone, we must either hide or become something new beneath the burning light. Before science, before language, before fire, there was instinct. A quiet compass etched into the cells of every creature that ever lived. It told birds when to fly turtles, where to hatch wolves, when to hunt butterflies, how to cross oceans, and salmon, how to return home without maps, without memory. It was the silent code of nature, whispered through generations older than any clock. But when the earth stops spinning, instinct begins to fail. And with it, the wild begins to forget itself. For millions of years, animals have moved with the rhythm of the planet, the spinning light and dark, the seasonal changes, the winds and tides and temperature cues. These weren't just background, they were the foundation of behavior. Without them, everything collapses. On the sunlit side, animals accustomed to day become trapped in a world where light never dims. Diurnal creatures, birds, squirrels, deer, struggle with constant brightness. Their internal clocks, tuned to sleep and feed with the arc of the sun, lose all reference. Many stop sleeping altogether. They wander restless, confused. Some begin to starve, not from lack of food, but from forgetting when to eat. Others perish from exhaustion. Nocturnal animals who depend on cover of darkness to hunt or hide vanish altogether. Owls, bats, big cats, they are overwhelmed by the ceaseless glare. Camouflage fails, prey becomes too exposed, predators lose the advantage of surprise. The delicate predator-prey balance begins to unravel. In forests and savannas, species that once shared space now clash at all hours with no cycle to separate their movements. And above, the skies grow emptier. Migratory birds, swans, geese, cranes never take flight. They wait for winds that never form, for magnetic cues that no longer exist, for stars that no longer shift across the heavens. When they do fly, they become lost. Entire flocks circle endlessly before collapsing from fatigue, falling like silent snow into unfamiliar terrain. Insect populations, too, spiral downward. Bees, whose internal navigation depends on sun angle and Earth's magnetic field, lose their path between hive and flower. They drift too far, disoriented, and die before returning. Without bees, pollination stops. Without pollination, the plants fall silent. Monarch butterflies, famed for their generational migration across continents, now sit still. Their journey was written in the seasons, but seasons no longer change. There is only burn or freeze. So they wait, wings closed, in places where milkweed no longer grows. Amphibians, frogs, salamanders, newts, whose fragile skin absorbs every whisper of environmental change, begin to vanish without sound. The shallow pools where they breed evaporate under the unmoving sun or freeze solid on the night side. Their songs disappear from wetlands, and with them, an entire branch of the chorus of life. In the oceans, confusion reigns. Marine life relies on temperature gradients, magnetic navigation, and tidal flows, all disrupted. Whales, especially those who migrate along ancient routes, begin to veer off course. Humpbacks beach themselves in record numbers. Pods of orcas drift aimlessly, circling islands that no longer host prey. Sea turtles crawl onto unfamiliar shores, lay eggs in too warm sand, then watch as hatchlings never emerge. Coral reefs' long symphonies of life begin to decay. Without plankton blooms, without coordinated spawning events synced to moonlight and temperature, the timing collapses. Fish no longer arrive at the right time or in the right numbers. The food web, once vast, interwoven, elegant, begins to tear. Even large mammals feel the shift. Elephants, known for their migratory memory, begin to lead herds into desert or snow. They are trying to follow instinct, But instinct no longer matches the world. Wolves hunt in the wrong season. Bears forget when to hibernate. Their bodies still crave sleep in the cold, but the cues never come. On the day side, bears overheat and starve. On the night side, they sleep too long and never wake. And humans watching all this begin to understand that something deeper is unraveling. It's not just extinction, it's erasure. The memories of the planet, written into feather, fur, and bone, are being overwritten by a world that no longer tells time. Conservationists try to intervene. Rescues are launched. Tracking collars are applied. Migration is simulated in captivity. Forest corridors are cooled with artificial mist. But each solution is a patch on a wound that deepens every hour. Zoos become arks. Genetic banks swell with frozen embryos. But outside in the wild, the silence spreads. And in that silence, a new kind of animal begins to emerge, not evolved by nature, but engineered by desperation. Scientists introduce photoperiod-independent species plants that grow without light cues, insects that breed without lunar cycles, animals modified for UV resistance, for cold endurance, for constant light. These creatures are not natural, but they are alive. And in time, they begin to fill the spaces left behind. A kind of new wilderness grows strange, uncanny quiet, a forest where creatures never sleep, where wolves have no season, where birds do not sing but only glide through frozen skies. But even in this strangeness there is something familiar, a pulse, a breath, a flicker of curiosity in an animal's eye. Because nature, even in collapse, seeks to continue, not in the way we remember, but in some way. And perhaps that is the final form of instinct, not memory, but resilience. A will to survive in a world that no longer remembers how to be wild. There's a hush that lives in forests, a kind of sacred breath beneath the canopy, soft, slow, alive. Trees don't speak the way we do, but they whisper. Through chemical signals, through root networks, through the tilt of leaves and the stretch of vines. They remember where the sun rises, where shade rests. They know when to sleep and when to bloom. But when the earth stops spinning, the forest forgets how to whisper. The rhythm is gone, and so is the breath. On the sunlit side, the trees are the first to suffer, not from cold or drought, but from too much certainty. The sun no longer arcs overhead. It becomes a ceiling of flame, fixed and unblinking. At first, plants reach for it, as they always have, but there is no moderation, no dusk, no rest, just raw, continuous light. The leaves open too wide. The stomata, tiny pores on the leaf surface, stay open for too long, releasing precious water into an air already dry. The roots draw upward in desperation, but the soil has grown hot. Moisture vanishes before it can be absorbed. The plant overheats, chokes on its own hunger, and dies. Photosynthesis, the miracle that fuels all green life, begins to fail, not from lack of light, but from its excess. The machinery inside the cells, long evolved for alternating cycles of day and night, burns out. Proteins misfold, chloroplasts collapse. The leaves begin to bleach, not the soft yellow of autumn, but a harsh, scorched white. Bark cracks, sap boils. Entire groves of trees fall silent. Even the great forests, Amazonian giants, African jungles, Southeast Asian canopies begin to collapse. Not in fire, but in heat stroke. The rain no longer comes with regularity. The wind has forgotten how to deliver clouds. What does fall is often acidic, superheated, sudden. A deluge after weeks of nothing. The soil cannot absorb it fast enough. Roots rot. Fungi vanish. Microbes die. And without these unseen partners, the trees lose their foundation. They topple, slowly without drama, like elders laying down to rest. On the dark side, a different stillness takes root. Without sunlight, photosynthesis stops altogether. Trees enter a kind of suspended animation. At first, they conserve energy. Some lose their leaves early. Others pull sugars deep into their trunks. The forest goes quiet, like winter without a promise of spring. Then the cold arrives. Frost forms on branches that never learned how to grow frost-hardened bark. Ice crystals spread through xylem and phloem, rupturing cells from within. Sap freezes, branches snap, trees fall not from wind, but from weight and silence. Snow covers everything, roots go numb. And below the frost line, the mycelial web, the vast fungal network that connects and nourishes the forest, begins to fray. Without warmth, without sugars from tree roots, it goes dormant, then dies, and with it the forest loses its memory. The twilight belt, narrow and flickering, offers the only remaining haven. Here the sun sits low, never rising, never setting. The light is soft, indirect, eternal dusk. Some plants cling to life in this shadowy corridor. Mosses thrive, shade-loving species adapt. Greenhouses spring up powered by geothermal energy filled with crops engineered to survive under continuous dim light. But the great trees, the sequoias, the mahoganies, the baobabs do not grow here. Their scale, their patience, their need for time and cycle cannot be faked. They belong to a world of turning. Without that, they are memory. In an attempt to preserve them, humans take samples. DNA banks swell with seeds and tissue. Laboratories recreate simulated cycles, artificial day and night, pulsing grow lights, temperature-controlled soils. Some trees survive this way, bonsai versions of what once towered over continents. Silent monuments under glass, the urban landscape changes too. Cities that once lined their streets with oaks, maples, jacarandas, shade and oxygen and beauty now plant plastic trees or tall solar panels shaped like leaves. In some places, trees are replaced by machines, towers that scrub carbon, that produce oxygen synthetically. They hum, but they do not sway. They do not bloom. They do not drop golden leaves in autumn. Children born into this world know trees as stories. They read about forests the way we read about ancient temples. There were places, they're told, where the air smelled green, where light and shadow danced across leaves, where wind moved through branches like a flute through breath. They ask if trees could speak. Parents hesitate, then say yes, and in the absence of real forests, stories become forests. Digital simulations, virtual woodlands projected in sleep domes, immersive parks with artificial scent and breeze and birdsong piped in from old recordings. The illusion comforts, but it doesn't root. And somewhere deep underground in vaults where temperature and humidity are carefully monitored, seeds wait. Thousands, millions, banked, preserved, dreaming of a world that turns, of dawn and dusk, of rain in rhythm, of night. They will not sprout here, not now, but they are patient. Trees always have been. They carry time in rings, in years etched in silence. They do not panic. They remember. And maybe if the earth ever finds its spin again, they will return not with fury or speed, but with green, with breath, with shade, and with the whisper of something very old waking once more. There was a time when our lives were shaped by motion we could not feel. The earth spun, and so we rose with the sun, ate at midday, fell asleep when the stars climbed high. Time was not just a number, it was light, warmth, hunger, quiet. It was rhythm, and we danced to it without ever learning the steps. But now, in a world where the earth no longer turns, that rhythm has fallen silent. And without it, we are lost. At first, it's subtle. People wake up groggy, not because they slept poorly, but because their bodies are no longer sure when to wake at all. On the day side, it's always light, blinding, unchanging. Circadian rhythms, our internal clocks begin to fray. Melatonin, the hormone that cues sleep, struggles to rise. Eyes feel dry even after hours in bed. Dreams fade into waking life. Sleep becomes something strange, fragmented, shallow, never satisfying. On the night side, the problem is different, but just as deep. With no sun to rise, the brain forgets what morning means. People sleep for 12, 16, even 20 hours at a time. Or not at all. Depression becomes common, not sadness, a flattening, a kind of emotional quiet where joy doesn't rise and grief doesn't fall, just a grayness, a numbness. Psychologists call it circadian dissonance. Others call it soul lag. In both hemispheres, time becomes unreliable. The hours blur, meals are skipped or repeated. Work becomes difficult not for lack of effort, but because the mind cannot track progress without change. The sky is the same, always. Even the passing of seasons slows then stops. Without Earth's tilt and spin, seasonal cycles weaken. Spring does not arrive. Summer never ends. Winter stretches into eternity. The air is either hot or cold, but never both. Clothing is no longer fashionable, it's armor. People live in climate shells wrapped in reflective layers on the bright side or thermal cocoons in the dark. Cities adapt. Buildings grow deeper instead of taller. Homes are lit from within, not by windows. Interior lighting follows artificial cycles, 16 hours of white, 8 hours of warm, dim. But the body knows. It always knows. Productivity plummets. Attention spans shrink. Creativity stutters. Artists report losing their sense of flow. Writers forget what sunlight through curtains looks like. Musicians struggle to write songs that breathe, and in this fog identity begins to shift, In ancient times, people were born under certain skies. Astrologers charted destiny by the heavens. Farmers watched the moon. Children learned the months by leaf and snowfall. Now birthdays are marked by clocks alone. There is no such thing as a sunny morning in May. Just hour 4732 of artificial daylight. Some cultures abandon calendars altogether. Instead of months, they count by internal states, the fifth cycle of wakefulness. The third silence. Since last rain, the 22nd flicker. Language begins to mutate. People stop using words like sunset dusk early. Instead, they say dim shift, glow change, dark pause. Technology offers solutions, smart lights, melatonin sprays, digital skylines that change slowly to simulate passing days. Virtual windows show clouds moving across fabricated skies. But it's not the same. Because the body is more than a machine, it is memory. And memory needs landmarks. Time was once carved by the shadows on the wall. By the way the sun stretched your limbs on a lazy afternoon, by the cooling of the breeze after dinner. Now we invent shadows. And somehow, the soul knows they are fake. Children born in this still world grow up differently. They do not run to windows. They do not point to clouds. They know the sky only through screens and sealed domes. They sleep when told. They eat when instructed. They adapt, perhaps too well. They never ask why the sky does not move. They do not expect it to. But older generations mourn, not loudly, just quietly, in stories, in songs that mention twilight even when no one remembers what it means, in the way they pause at doorways, looking up as if expecting something to have changed. Religion shifts. Some worship the twilight where light and dark meet. Others turn to ancient solar deities praying for motion to return. A few build new philosophies around stillness, seeing it as clarity as truth. Without distraction, without change, they say the mind can finally see itself. Meditation becomes widespread not as spiritual escape, but as the only way to feel passage when nothing else moves. Meanwhile, science advances. Biologists engineer new human sleep cycles, polyphasic rest chemical timekeeping neural light therapy. Cities establish time councils groups who decide when local artificial day begins. Some regions run on 20-hour clocks, others on 30. Coordination across continents falters. International meetings are held in neutral cycles. A new universal measure. Global Light Reference GLR is introduced, but even it feels arbitrary. And yet life continues. People find meaning in rhythmless days. Lovers still kiss in simulated moonlight. Grandparents still tell stories, their voices becoming clocks when no others remain. Some communities turn back to nature, not the great forests or wild plains, but to small cycles. The bloom of a flower under grow lights. The hatching of indoor chicks, the ripple of algae in a hydroponic tube. They build shrines to rhythm candles that burn in hours, bells that chime every 6. And slowly, from the ashes of a lost planet, new rituals form. Because humans are not just thinkers. We are feelers of time. even when time no longer moves. And perhaps that's the final act of adaptation, not to restore the old world, but to learn how to be whole in one that no longer turns. There are places where the sun never rises fully and never truly sets, not burned by eternal daylight, nor frozen by endless night, but caught in a soft, trembling band of dusk, the twilight belt. Here, in the narrow corridor between day and dark, life found its last foothold. It wasn't planned, no map marked it, but when the earth stopped spinning and half the planet was locked in fire and the other in ice, the world began to migrate not toward hope, but toward balance. That balance lived in shadow. The first settlements were desperate. Families arriving with nothing but battered vehicles, solar blankets, cracked water filters, and stories from the dayside stories of blistered streets, melted cities, sun that never blinked. Others came from the cold side, gaunt and pale, their eyes wide from weeks without light. They met somewhere in the middle, and in that half-light, they began to build. These twilight cities were not designed for beauty. They were built to endure. Structures were low to the ground, with deep foundations to avoid soil instability. Roofs sloped gently to collect moisture from mist, which became more precious than gold. Windows were small, filtered, layered, allowing just enough light for growing greens, but not enough to overheat. Streets were narrow winding, designed to break wind and hold warmth. Materials were local volcanic rock, compressed mycelium flexible composites. Nothing flashy, everything functional. In these cities, energy came from contrast. Wind turbines lined the outer edge where the air shifted between hot and cold. Geothermal vents were tapped, providing warmth from within the earth. In some places, water wheels turned slowly in glacial runoff. The people themselves moved slowly. There was no rush, no ticking clock. Days were not counted by hours, but by breaths, by cycles of lantern light and shared meals. Time became communal. Bells marked the beginning and end of shifts. Firelight marked the turning of mood. In the markets, goods were bartered in warmth, quiet, and listening, not just in food or tools. Crops were grown vertically, in underground stacks fed by grow lamps. Mushrooms flourished. Algae ponds shimmered blue in the dimness. Leafy greens were cultivated in carefully timed rotations, mimicking lost seasons. These foods didn't taste of sunshine, but they were alive. And that was enough. The people of the twilight lived closer than ever before. Walls were thin not by design, but because materials were scarce. You could hear your neighbor stir in the next room. Children learned to whisper. Couples argued in hand signs. Communities shared heat in long sleeping halls where breath condensed on ceilings and blankets were layered in communal stacks. Privacy became a luxury, but intimacy became survival. Culture did not vanish. It changed. Music slowed, long, droning tones designed to lull and comfort. Flutes, violins, low drums. Art turned inward, charcoal sketches, sand sculptures, tactile weaving. Without bright light, color faded. Contrast mattered more. People decorated their walls with shadows. Some danced not in public plazas, but in private, silent rituals. Movement became a kind of meditation. Festivals celebrated the barely perceptible changes, the warm mist, the soft wind, the dimming shift. The concept of holiday changed. There was no weekend, no summer. Instead, there were pauses, moments when communities would turn off all artificial light, sit in darkness, and remember the old sky. Children born in these cities never missed the sun. They grew up knowing the world in shades of pearl and silver. They learned to navigate by texture and temperature. They memorized which buildings vibrated slightly when the wind blew, which stones stayed warm after dusk. Their play was quiet. Their games involved story mimicry, shadow. They were not lesser, just different. The city itself became a kind of organism, breathing, flexible, attuned to the smallest environmental changes. When wind direction shifted, buildings creaked. When frost threatened inner walls, thickened with steam. The infrastructure was responsive, not rigid. People did not fight nature here. They folded into it. Not all cities survived. Some collapsed under the weight of their own hope. Others drowned in coastal mist or were consumed by slow rolling earthquakes as tectonic balance shifted. But the ones that did endure became legendary, whispered about in burnt out settlements on the dayside, hoped for in the ice halls of the dark. Pilgrims walked miles to reach them, feet blistered, lungs aching, seeking not safety, but rhythm. And if they were welcomed, they had to learn the quiet. The Twilight Cities did not tolerate loudness, not in voice, not in intention. Here, ambition was not a virtue, endurance was, listening was, sharing was. Governance was often circular, rotating groups called keepers or shadow speakers who met in thermal rooms, each representing a district of breath and light. Decisions were made slowly with ceremony. When you only get one harvest a year, even if it's artificial, you weigh every choice. Not everything was idyllic. There were arguments, jealousy, scarcity, sometimes violence, but it was contained by necessity. When warmth is rationed, community becomes armor. No one can afford exile. In time, these cities developed something else philosophy, not just of survival, but of meaning. Books were written on slowness. Schools taught the ethics of balance. Children were taught to recite, not too bright, not too cold, not too loud, not too bold. In between, we hold the line. And for the first time since the earth had stopped, humanity began to feel deep in the chest that they belonged again. Not to the spinning globe they had lost, but to the still one they had learned to live with. These were not the cities of light, nor the cities of ice. These were the cities of gray where the shadows lingered and somehow saved us. In the old world, sunlight was life. We planted with it, warmed our homes by it, measured time with its angle, worshipped it in myth and architecture. And when we became modern, we found a new devotion, harvesting the sun itself. Solar panels spread across rooftops, deserts, and oceans. Fields of blue glass soaking in photons, converting them into power promise future. But when the earth stopped spinning and one side was locked forever in light, that gift became something else, something beautiful, something monstrous, something both. On the day side of this still planet, the sun never sets. At first, this seemed like salvation. Imagine it: endless solar energy, no more waiting for daylight, no battery storage for night, just pure, uninterrupted light 24 hours a day. Engineers cheered, governments invested, solar fields multiplied, entire regions shifted their economy to the sun. Vast arrays bloomed across the plains, kilometers wide, shimmering like lakes. The panels followed the sun no longer. They didn't have to. It was always there, fixed, bright, eternal. But then came the heat, and the reality that no machine is immune to fire. Solar panels are designed to operate within a range. Too little sunlight, and they're useless. Too much, and they begin to melt. On the bright side of the stopped Earth, the solar arrays soon entered temperatures beyond tolerable. Circuits buckled, wires blistered, surfaces warped. Some panels reflected light so intensely they scorched the ground beneath them. Others ignited dry grass, triggering fires that spread between mirrored corridors. Energy began to overheat not just in wires, but in the people who built them. Technicians fainted while repairing arrays. Maintenance became impossible in midday. So they tried new methods: cooled panels with circulating fluids, buried systems beneath transparent domes. Some built sun towers, high-altitude solar collectors that sent power down via microwave beams. But even these began to fail. Heat rose. Efficiency fell. A new question emerged. How do you harvest light that's trying to kill you? Still, people adapted. Giant sunshield systems were installed above cities, folding mirrors that opened and closed like mechanical pedals to control the burn. Others turned to helio-braking partial sunlight filters made from suspended nanomesh that dimmed the sky to safer levels. It worked for a while, but all these systems required energy to sustain energy. A feedback loop. The brighter the sun, the more power you could generate, but the more power you needed to survive the consequences of generating it. On the fringe of the twilight zone, some settlements found a better balance. They harvested low-angle sunlight, cooler and softer, using long, slow tracking mirrors. Solar rivers of photovoltaic skin snaked along the ridges, half in light, half in shade. These communities became models of balance, but the farther toward the center of the day, side balance was not enough. That was where the solar cities rose. Megastructures carved from obsidian-colored metal, designed not just to absorb light, but weaponize it. Some became power plants for the whole hemisphere. Others, fortresses. Energy became economy. A single solar spine stretching hundreds of meters could power 100,000 people or hold them hostage. Wars broke out over angles, over placement, over shadows. For the first time in history, people fought for the right to be burned, and still the sun did not move. It watched, unblinking, unforgiving. Even solar food algae farms' vertical growth systems began to suffer. Crops designed for full light started to mutate. Proteins broke down. Nutrients failed. Sunlight unfiltered destroyed what it once nourished. Engineers turned to synthetic photosynthesis, creating dark crops that grew in underground chambers using chemical light. These required vast solar power, to feed the plants that humans could no longer grow in sun. The paradox deepened. We needed the sun more than ever, but couldn't survive its presence. In response, culture changed. Language around light darkened. Phrases like sunrise blessing vanished. Instead, people spoke of holding the burn or the long glow. Children learned to fear open skies. People no longer sunbathed. They shielded. No one wanted a tan. Complexion became survival. Entire fashion industries arose around radiation gear, layered, reflective, breathable. Sunscreen was no longer cosmetic. It was currency. In some places, solar temples were built not to worship, but to appease. Massive black obelisks designed to absorb excess radiation, their surfaces humming with stored heat. Rituals were held to thank the sun for restraint. Others built shade shrines, praying for cloud cover or even a momentary eclipse. And in some remote corners, there were those who sought to leave the surface entirely. High-orbit solar collectors were launched satellites that gathered energy from above and sent it down in controlled pulses. But space was no longer safe. The magnetosphere had faded. Radiation flooded low Earth orbit. Satellite lifespans shortened. Solar storms fried their circuits. There was no escape, no true sanctuary, just adaptation and reckoning. In time, some began to whisper a strange hope. What if we turn the Earth again? Projects were proposed, massive engines buried deep in the mantle, using geothermal energy to reignite the planet's spin. Others suggested gravitational capture, steering asteroids to nudge the Earth back into rotation. Most scientists laughed, some wept, others kept building panels. Because even if the sun burned us, it still gave us power. Power was survival. Power was choice. And in a world with no night, even a curse could be carved into a tool. But somewhere deep beneath the scorched soil, seeds still waited. Not just literal ones, but human ones. Ideas, dreams, a child drawing a spinning planet with curved arrows and smiling suns. A story passed down, once the sun moved across the sky. A wish whispered into the light. Maybe someday it will move again, somewhere between the day that never ends and the night that never lifts. There is a line. It's not drawn in ink or stone, it's not visible from orbit, but everyone knows where it is. The farmers who fled the blinding sun, the nomads who abandoned the frozen dark, the scientists, the scavengers, the mothers carrying children in thermal wraps. They call it many names: the dim line, the gray strip, the breathing edge. But to most, it is simply this, the only place left to live. This twilight zone, narrow, fickle, in constant tension, is the final place where balance hasn't died. Not burned, not frozen, just flickering. Here the sun sits permanently on the horizon, its light slanting sideways, casting long, perpetual shadows. The sky is always the color of memory, bruised lavender, dusty orange, sometimes pale gray. Not quite dawn, not quite dusk. It is a sky that never decides, and beneath it people run. From both sides, from the glare, from the ice, from heat stroke and frostbite, and the slow unraveling of biology. They flee cities that crumbled under sunstorms. They leave behind bunkers buried too deep in frost. They come on foot by cart, in creaking solar skiffs or makeshift sleds, and they run toward the line. At first, they arrived in scattered waves. Survivors, wanderers, whispered rumors of habitable land. But then came the rush, a flood of humanity, chasing rumor, chasing rhythm, chasing the one place where air could still move and soil could still remember what roots felt like. This edge became a frontier not just of geography, but of time, because here time still moves just enough, not in hours or days, but in shifts of color, in the cooling of skin, in the stretch of shadows. People in the edge town speak of light moods, not clocks. They say, it's blue gold now, or the stones are warm. Some carry suntiles on their backs panels that flex to gather just enough light to power a home for a night. Others track heat gradients in the soil to decide where to plant. And the plants grow. Not fast, not tall, but enough. Potatoes, mushrooms, hybrid grains with low-light chloroplasts. In greenhouses half buried in stone under light filters made from the skins of extinct jellyfish food sprouts, like cautious hope. But life here is not easy. The twilight zone is always moving just slightly, just enough to erode certainty. The earth may be still, but its systems still breathe. The thermal difference between the day and night sides causes air to stir ever so subtly, and that stirring pushes the twilight belt, stretching it, shrinking it, making it migrate. A town that thrived last year may now be too hot. Another may have slipped into shadow. So people move with the light. Entire communities designed on wheels, tracks tethers. Mobile cities crawl slowly across the landscape, like metal caterpillars chasing equilibrium. The most advanced are called lightwalkers, modular habitats, with expanding domes, mirrored shields, and atmospheric recyclers. They glide along mapped paths of thermal neutrality. But most don't have that luxury. They build edge camps quick to set up, quicker to leave. Tent cities covered in soot to absorb cold, then stripped clean to reflect heat. Each camp a flicker, a brief echo of civilization before it fades and reforms again miles away. And yet in this restlessness, something rare is born, a new kind of unity. Because here, everyone is running from something. And everyone is running together. National borders have vanished. Languages blend. A child from the Sahara plays with one from the Yukon. They don't speak the same tongue, but they know the same sunburn, the same frostbite. They recognize the way hands shake when food has been scarce. Edge culture emerges not bound by history, but by motion. Songs are written to match the wind's direction. Clothing is layered in two ways, reflective on one side, insulated on the other. Tools are dual-purpose, one for heat, one for cold. People keep two thermometers in their homes, one to warn of burn, the other of freeze. Light is worshipped here not as a god, but as a force to be negotiated. There are no sun festivals, only shade offerings and glow vigils where people leave mirrors pointed skyward, then cover them gently with cloth, asking for just enough. Fire is no longer feared, but rationed. Cold is no longer hated, but managed. Life here is not about dominance. It is about balance. And nowhere is that more visible than in the architecture. Homes are built with thick stone walls on one side and open ventilation on the other. Roofs are sloped east to catch morning light, west to shed it. Windows are cut into narrow slits, some glazed with pigment made from crushed lichens that change color with temperature. Entire villages are painted in thermal reactive clay, walls that glow golden at noon and darken at dusk. Nothing here stays still, not even stillness. Conflict does happen. Resources are tight. Sometimes a group arrives too late to a fertile strip. Sometimes wind shifts and famine follows, but disputes are rarely prolonged. No one here can afford long wars, not when the twilight moves. The deeper realization begins to dawn. This belt is all we have. On one side lies the burn, on the other the freeze. Between them, the thread, a ribbon of breath around a world that no longer spins. The last place where a child can run barefoot, where steam rises from soil after soft rain, where two people can sit outside without shielding their eyes or layering their limbs, and maybe, just maybe, where a new kind of earth can be born, not built on control, but on observation, on humility, on movement without panic, growth without greed. In that edge we find the truth. Motion was never just about the turning of the planet. It was the way we felt time, the way we found each other, and even when the world goes still, that longing, that chase toward balance, never stops. There was a time when we lived by the sun, not metaphorically, but literally. We woke when light returned. We slept when darkness fell. We planted by the seasons, prayed by the phases of the moon, danced when shadows stretched across the grass. Time was something we felt in the skin, in the soil, in the breath. But when the earth stopped spinning, so did time. Not in the strict sense, atoms still vibrated, light still traveled. But the feeling of time, the lived rhythm, the dance between day and night that vanished, and with it, the clock lost its meaning. In the beginning, people clung to hours. They wore watches long after sunrise ceased to matter. They marked calendars as if seasons still changed, but slowly the numbers became unmoored from sensation. The sun no longer rose. The stars no longer drifted. Noon and midnight became ideas, not experiences. On the day side, light was constant. Clocks told people when to sleep, but their bodies rebelled. They woke unrested. Time drifted. A 24-hour cycle felt like guesswork. Minutes stretched in the heat. Hours bled together. On the night side, time collapsed inward. In the dark, the mind played tricks. Some communities lost count of days entirely. Generations passed in the black. What was Monday? What was a year? Nobody knew. On the edge, the twilight belt time flickered like the light, uncertain gray trembling. And so a new era began, the era of the unclocked. First came the abandoning. Towers stopped chiming, bell rhythms stilled. Schools no longer followed a start bell. Work shifted to task-based systems, finish the job, then rest. Some adopted biological timekeeping: eat when hungry, sleep when tired, meet when ready. In some cities, watches were outlawed entirely. Time was seen as a relic of a spinning world. Then came the new measures. In domed communities, artificial light cycles were introduced. 16 hours of brightness, 8 hours of dim. People called it a standard arc. It was not meant to replicate the old day, just to provide structure. Children born under these lights learned to crawl and speak and age without ever asking what month it was. They counted wakes, not weeks, cycles, not seconds. Some cultures based their calendars on other rhythms: the slow pulsing of geothermal springs, the shifting temperature of stone. In coastal regions, they watched tides, though even tides had weakened without spin. Still, they served as a heartbeat. Some used the breath, communal breaths. One settlement defined an hour as the time it took 50 people to breathe together slowly in a circle. A day was 20 breathing rounds. There were no clocks, only the rise and fall of chests. And in this stillness, ritual became time. Instead of sunrise, people greeted the first glow, the moment when light tilted slightly warmer. Instead of birthdays, they celebrated becoming, marked by inward journeys, shared stories, first deep sleep in the dark, or first calm breath in the light. Memory replaced the calendar. Elders said, "The year your brother was born was the season of the black rain," or "We met in the second warmth after the long hunger." Time became not linear, but textured, something you could walk through, not count. Technology tried to help. Quantum clocks ticked flawlessly. But what good is perfect time when the sky is still? Atomic precision could tell you it was 14:03:17, but your skin said nothing. The mind does not live in nanoseconds. It lives in light, in warmth, in waiting. Some rebelled. Entire groups rejected timekeeping in all forms. They called themselves the untimed. They painted over clocks, dismantled timers, lived by intuition. Their homes had no alarms. Their meetings happened when it feels right. Outsiders saw chaos. They saw freedom. Among the untimed music still played slow, looping, formless. Meals were shared without plan. Dreams were remembered without urgency. Children wandered between learning circles. Elders dozed in the heat. And then, perhaps inevitably, philosophy followed. Thinkers asked, if time is a human invention, who does it serve if the earth does not turn? Why must we? They wrote treatises on stillness, on surrender, on the elegance of non-measurement, some called Dhammatsant, for the abolition of time altogether. Others simply asked, can you be present truly if there is no future coming behind you? Religion shifted. Temples now lit not by sunrise, but by slow-turning internal suns or no light at all. Monasteries timed prayer to the growth rate of a moss wall. Sacred texts were rewritten without timestamps. They began not with "in the beginning," but with "in the breath," and yet some still clung to time, not as measurement, as hope. In hidden chambers, scientists worked on models to restart rotation. They kept strict clocks synchronized to a dream that one day the earth would turn again, that a sunrise might return, that a shadow might stretch and shrink once more. And so they counted. Day 1, day 2, year 1 of stillness, year 2, on and on, not because the numbers mattered, but because keeping them gave shape to waiting. And perhaps that is what time was always about. Not control, not precision, but story. A way to remember where we were, a way to imagine where we might go. And so even now, in this unmoving world, someone somewhere is marking this moment, not with a tick, not with a bell, but with a whisper. Now, this breath, this is real. This is the moment we are alive in. The earth has stopped. The winds have quieted. The oceans no longer chase the moon. The sun no longer moves across the sky. Time has lost its rhythm. Seasons no longer arrive. The stars stay frozen in their constellations. Yet, something still moves. Deep inside a chest, inside every chest, a quiet, steady beat, the human heart. When everything else halted, we did not. And maybe that is the most miraculous part of this whole story. Not the science, not the survival, but that, amid silence and stillness, something in us refused to stop. In the beginning it was instinct, the raw, ancient kind, to run from fire, to shield against cold, to feed our children, to find shelter. But it did not end there. Instinct grew into something more choice. Choice to stay, choice to build, choice to love even when the world no longer turned. Across the locked landscapes of earth, people planted where nothing should grow. They learned to harvest fog, to write calendars based on moss growth and light color. They built homes in the shadows and carved warmth from the ice. In domes and tunnels and mobile towns, they told stories not of what was lost, but of what might still be found. And in those stories, the heart beat louder. Artists painted new skies, not blue, not golden, but layered with memory. Musicians composed with silence as the central note. Writers imagined dawn not as a return of light, but as a feeling of renewal. Entire cultures emerged that had never seen a sunrise and yet still believed in the concept of beginning again. Love continued. People fell for one another in the long, soft light of the twilight belt. They proposed marriage under frozen stars. They raised children under filtered skylights and taught them about a sun that once moved and might one day move again. They didn't promise it. They didn't need to, because what mattered wasn't the rotation, it was the connection. Hands still reached for other hands. Eyes still searched for eyes. Laughter still echoed between stone walls. In the cold cities of the dark side, families invented warmth. In the glowing heat of the day, side communities invented shade. And in the edge between, they invented each other. Language didn't disappear, it evolved. New words were born, words for grief that lingered too long, words for love in stillness, words for a future not marked by clocks but by breath. And perhaps the most enduring of them all, heartlight, the word used to describe that feeling when someone near you makes everything feel okay again, even if nothing is. Scientists didn't stop either. They tried. Some tried to restart the spin, others tried to simulate it. They knew it might not work, but the trying was the point. The effort became sacred, not as rebellion against nature, but as a gesture of belonging, a way of saying we are still here, we are still thinking, we are still dreaming. Spirituality changed. Faith no longer rested in movement. It rested in stillness, in presence, in the breath between words, in the silence between pulses. Temples lit their halls not with sunrise, but with the glow of shared touch. Prayers were whispered into cupped hands, passed from one person to another, like a secret, like a heartbeat. The old religions adapted. New ones were born, all of them orbiting the same quiet center: how to live when nothing moves but us. And maybe that's the final truth. We always thought the world carried us, spun us forward, gave us our days. But when the spin stopped, we discovered something profound. We carried each other. We became the rhythm. Our footsteps across the scorched stone, our lullabies in the frozen dark, our stories passed across generations like kindling. Our tears, our joy, our patience, our pulse. And that pulse is what still beats now, not in defiance, not in desperation, but in quiet, rooted hope. Hope that is not loud. Hope that doesn't require sunlight or clocks or the turning of planets. Hope that lives in this breath before a kiss. In the moment a hand reaches for another without needing to know what time it is. Hope that maybe someday the earth will spin again, but even if it doesn't, we will still sing, still build, still love, because the heart, the human heart, does not need a planet to turn in order to beat. It just needs another heart to beat with. When the earth stopped turning, people looked up and saw a sky that didn't move. The sun no longer rose or set. The moon, if it appeared at all, sat still like a pale, forgotten coin. The stars hung in place, unmoving, unblinking, and in that silence above, something else began to move. Fear. Not the quick kind, the kind that shouts and runs, but the deep kind, the kind that seeps in when answers run dry, the kind that whispers in the dark when science runs out of breath. And so faith changed. At first, people clung tighter to what they knew. Churches stayed open longer. Temples filled with candles. Mosques and synagogues echoed with ancient prayers. But the rhythm those prayers had always followed, sunrise, salat, evening mass, seasonal festivals, all collapsed. There was no Sunday anymore. No Sabbath, no dawn, no harvest moon. Time had broken. Rituals became disoriented. Faith didn't fade, it cracked. And through those cracks, something stranger crept in. New voices, new visions, new gods. In the eternal daylight, cults began to rise. Some worshipped the sun not as a source of life, but as a being of judgment. They wore mirrored robes, painted their faces in gold dust, spoke in tongues under the blazing sky. They called themselves the Order of the Constant Eye. Their doctrine was simple. The sun stopped moving because it was watching, always watching. Motion had been a test. The stop was a verdict. To earn forgiveness, they stood for hours in the open light, fasting, burning, bleeding beneath their mirrored banners. Some went blind, others died, but new followers came. Because people wanted meaning. On the dark side, a different faith emerged, the children of the veil. Clad in black, they believed that the sun had turned away in shame, that earth had been cast into shadow for its arrogance. They saw the night not as punishment, but as mercy. In frozen temples carved from ice, they sang low hymns in forgotten dialects. They let frost cover their hands, believing numbness brought clarity. They waited for the day the sun would blink again. But others weren't so patient. The spinners, as they were, first mocked, became something more serious. They believed Earth had only stopped because humanity had lost its balance, its dance. So they danced, constantly. Rituals of spinning, twirling movement in circles, day and night, alone or together, in abandoned malls, on empty highways, in glowing underground halls. Their belief, if enough of us turn the planet, we'll remember, sounded absurd until people began to join, because spinning gave people rhythm. It gave them breath. And in a world without sunrise, a breath could feel like salvation. But not all cults sought harmony. Some sowed fear. The skybound, for instance, believed that Earth had been left behind, that the gods, or aliens, or ancient ancestors had spun the planet for a reason, and we had failed. Their answer: escape. They hoarded old rockets, built strange balloons, constructed ascension towers with solar elevators pointing toward the frozen stars. Their gospel was filled with countdowns, promises, strange calculations about orbital windows that no longer existed. Many died in failed launches, but many followed because hope can wear any mask. In the twilight zone, where balance still whispered, syncretic faiths emerged, blends of old and new, temples with stained glass showing a sun locked on the horizon, chants that merged Gregorian melody with spoken algorithms, prayers offered to both gods and gravity. The Twilight people called themselves the Bridgers, those who lived between extremes. They believed stillness was not judgment, but invitation, that the earth in stopping was waiting to be heard, so they listened. In long silences, in soft steps, in the shape of clouds that somehow still formed. They listened for what the planet might be trying to say. Not all believed in higher forces. Some turned to inner gods, to meditation, to solitude, to long fasting in dark rooms. Philosophies grew around stillness. The order of one breath taught that the only true time was the inhale and exhale, that no clock could contain truth, that stillness was not absence, but presence. Their temples had no lights, no sounds, only cushions and heartbeat. And yet in the places where community broke down, where hunger outpaced meaning, darker faiths emerged. Sacrifice cults, fire cults, those who blamed the children, those who believed that only by blood would the planet spin again. Entire villages vanished under these shadows. Survivors spoke of drums, of masked figures, of red-painted altars lit by artificial dawn. It became clear when the world loses direction, belief becomes a compass made of bone. The old world's gods did not vanish. They were rewritten, adapted. A crucifix placed under a UV lamp, a prayer mat reoriented not toward Mecca, but toward the edge of light. A Torah read by memory in the dark when batteries died. Faith proved resilient, but changed. Even atheists found themselves whispering into the wind, not to something above, but perhaps to the planet itself, asking it to remember its spin, to forgive, to come back. And maybe the most honest faith that emerged was not a religion at all. It was ritual in motion. The way a mother tucked her child in with the same soft lullaby, even when the clock no longer told her it was night. The way a man lit a single candle every 12 hours just to mark the world's breathing. The way people gathered in silence, not to worship, but to be warm together in the stillness. That, too, is belief. Not in gods or suns or cycles, but in each other. In the simple miracle that even when the sky no longer moves, we can still hold hands, still blink, still speak, still wait. Not for a sign, not for salvation, just for the next breath, the next moment, the next beat of the human heart ticking on like a tiny earth still spinning in the dark. It didn't happen all at once, not with a bang. No sudden blackout, no catastrophic crash, just a quiet flicker. A buffering wheel that never stopped spinning, a message that read, reconnecting, and never did. And then, slowly, everywhere, silence. The internet died. Not just a website, not just a server, but the whole shimmering web of glass and signal of light under oceans and data in clouds. When the earth stopped turning, the cloud fell, and we discovered what it meant to be truly disconnected. At first, it felt like an inconvenience. People cursed their routers, reset devices, stared at frozen news feeds. In the bright cities of the dayside, servers began to fail from heat. Cooling systems overheated. Data centers once humming and glowing with life went dark. In the cold zones, power grids froze, fiber lines snapped under weight of frost, satellite dishes iced over misaligned fell silent, and in space the satellites themselves began to drift. Without Earth's rotation to guide orbital paths, without magnetic reference, many lost synchronization. Some tumbled into disuse, others were hit by solar radiation unfiltered by a collapsing magnetosphere. GPS collapsed first, planes rerouted blindly. Cargo ships navigated with printed maps. Then came the cell towers, once interconnected, in a global choreography now blinking erratically, unable to triangulate or relay. Social media feeds froze, messages remained unread, search engines stopped responding. Then banks, markets, hospitals, emergency services. Websites didn't crash, they simply became quiet ruins, frozen pages from a world that once spoke in real time. Emails undelivered, group chats empty, loved ones unreachable. News ceased to be breaking, it simply broke. And in that strange hush, something deeper broke too. Our sense of one another. For decades we had lived in a world where we were always, always connected, where you could wake up and speak to someone on the other side of the planet, where ideas flew across oceans in milliseconds, where the truth of one place could be witnessed by millions in another. But when the net dissolved, so did the illusion of nearness. We became islands again, not metaphorically truly. Settlements on the day side had no idea what was happening in the cold. Communities in the twilight belt could no longer contact the cities they once traded with. Even inside nations' regions fractured into zones of silence. Some tried to rebuild. Engineers rigged old radio towers, ham signals, analog repeaters. Children who had never used cassette tapes learned to tune shortwave. In bunkers and domes, tiny networks formed intranets, closed loops of communication inside a village, a dome, a train. They called it the patchwork. Messages were stored on drives hand-carried between outposts like modern carrier pigeons. There were rumors of a Sky Network balloons carrying mesh repeaters drifting above the twilight belt. Some said they could carry a text message across 600 kilometers in 4 days. Others said they were just decoys used by traveling cults to lure the curious. Either way, communication slowed. And in that slowness, something curious happened. People began to speak differently. Without the net, without streaming, without feeds, language changed. Sentences grew longer, more deliberate. There was no typing fast to be heard first, no war of notifications, just the space between words. Conversations became moments. Letters became events. Every message mattered. People wrote entire essays before sending a question. They signed off with warmth. Please write back when the wind shifts. Send news when the sky clears. I will wait by the mirror. Schools returned to paper, chalk, oral storytelling. Knowledge passed not by link, but by voice. Libraries became temples. Flash drives were worn like jewelry. Entire communities preserved the last. Update. The final snapshot of the internet they had before everything froze. Some worshipped it, others feared it, but everyone remembered it. What you had saved was all you had. Some towns appointed archivists keepers of cached knowledge, responsible for sorting and verifying whatever fragments remained. Outdated maps, incomplete tutorials, books stored in PDF that could no longer be opened. Entire professions formed around decoding corrupted data. But the most profound shift came not in infrastructure, but in identity. Without profiles, without usernames, without the constant gaze of others, people changed. Some felt lost, no longer able to present themselves to the world. Others felt relief, as if they had been unshackled from the mirror. Depression rose in some places, but in others, peace. Children played without screens. Adults talked in long circles after meals. The pause between sentences stretched. And sometimes in the silence after someone spoke, you could hear birds again. Not every place gave up. In the twilight metropoles, fusion reactors powered vast communication arrays, trying to re-establish a global pulse. Underground cables were rerouted. New low-orbit satellites were launched with hardened shielding. There were whispers of a second internet, slower, quieter, more private, spreading through geothermal repeater hubs. But it would never be what it was, because what it was had required motion. A spinning world, a synchronized system, a trust in speed. Now the world was slow, disjointed, human. And in that slowness, stories came back. Oral epics, handwritten journals, folk songs tuned to the rhythm of foot travel and memory. Elders once again became search engines. You didn't Google how to fix something. You walked 3 blocks and asked Marta. And Marta told you, with her hands and a story, and tea. In a way, we never lost connection. We just changed its frequency, from digital to tactile, from global to neighbor, from instant to real. And maybe, just maybe, that was the connection we'd forgotten how to hear all along. Once upon a time, we built entire worlds out of opposites, day and night, light and shadow, morning and evening. We spoke of sunshine as hope, of darkness as mystery. Our languages danced with these rhythms: good morning sleep, tight sunset lover, afraid of the dark. But when the earth stopped spinning, those opposites lost their edges. They bled into one another. And then they began to disappear. It started subtly. On the day side, people stopped saying good night. There was no night, just light, endless, blinding, unmoving. On the night side, no one said rise and shine. There was no rising, no shine, just cold and dark and a sky that never changed. The words still lived in memory, but they felt strange in the mouth, misplaced, like clothes that no longer fit. So people began to edit, to invent. They said soft glow instead of sunrise, dim fall instead of sunset. Children born after the stillness asked what noon meant. Parents didn't know how to explain it. It's when the sun is highest, they said. But isn't it always there? The children asked. And the parents fell silent. Language had always been a mirror, but now the mirror cracked. Words began to reflect something else, something no longer anchored in the scataic colors. Sky blue became meaningless. The sky was different now, frozen on one side, too dark to name on the other. Sun-kissed became an insult in the heat zones. Snow White had no joy in the frostlands. Even emotion changed shape. Feeling down used to mean sadness born from gray skies and rain, but now the skies never shifted. So people said, I feel stalled, I feel unspun, or simply, I feel flat. Time words fractured. Minutes were stretched, hours warped, calendars rewritten. In the twilight cities, people no longer used days of the week. Instead, they said, after dim during low orange between the 5th meal and shared warmth. The word tomorrow lost traction. See you tomorrow became see you after the next glow change. People still marked age, but birthdays were no longer tied to dates. They were events. A child's first time walking into light alone. A person's last full sleep. A marriage marked by the shifting of mist. Words became localized. On the bright side, people used scales of burned sun-flat bronze line over white. Instead of morning and afternoon, they spoke of lightweight and headburn. In the cold zones, they counted shadow, deep, ice, thick, frost, dry. Communication became metaphorical. Language turned inward. In place of shared cycles, people invented emotional calendars. I'm in my 3rd dim. It's been a long cold between us. She speaks like first melt. These phrases carried weight only locals understood. But somehow, they worked. Stories transformed. Fairy tales were rewritten. No longer, once upon a time when the sun rose, but once in a place where the sky no longer blinked, or they waited 5 sleeps near the red edge before the mist spoke. Poetry evolved. It slowed, grew longer, less about rhyming, more about texture. Rhythm was found in heartbeat, not meter. Song lyrics abandoned time and place. Love songs spoke of waiting not all night, but through the still. Some words vanished completely. No more sunny side up, jet lag, lunch break, rush hour, twilight zone, because they no longer made sense. Instead, new words bloomed. Words like flinching glow. the sense of dread before stepping into bright exposure. Veins leap, a term for the deep, dreamless rest found only in fully shielded bunkers. Gray space, that mental fog when you've been awake too long under artificial sky. Or light, deep, the intimacy of whispering under a dim lamp, knowing it's not dark, but private enough to feel like it. Language also flattened in places, where communication became rare words were stripped for utility. Heat, cold, food, water, stay, go. These became the base code of survival. But in the quieter corners, language flowered into new poetry. Entire dialects were built around the quality of stillness. The Escalites, descendants of frost nomads, developed 37 words for the way frost forms on metal. The Lumas, the light-edge dwellers, measured time by skin tone shifts and used color as verb. She goldened for 3 meals. In the absence of the old world's rhythm, language became the new pulse. It filled the silence. It reoriented minds, and perhaps most touchingly, it reunited meaning with experience. We remembered that words aren't fixed. They are maps, and maps must shift when the world does. Even writing changed. In the day side, ink faded too quickly. So they etched, or burned onto bark. In the night side, they carved into ice, or used phosphorescent pigments from fungi. Books were precious. Spoken word returned. Elders became libraries. And the oldest sentence shared across regions in many forms was this: "It used to spin," they say. The children would ask, "What does that mean?" And the answer changed every time. Because that was language now, not a system, but a song, a living thing, breathing with us, adapting, forgetting, remembering. Not telling us what to say, but asking us, "What does this stillness feel like to you?" And whatever we answered became a word. History used to be measured in revolutions, not the kind with banners and speeches, but literal revolutions. The earth turning once around its axis, one day, one night. That spin was our heartbeat. Every empire, every war, every poem was stamped against it, dated, cataloged, all remembered in the rhythm of rotation. But then the earth stopped spinning, and the past began to drift. Suddenly we couldn't say 10 years ago and mean what we used to, because there were no more years the way we'd known them. No days, no nights, just burn and frost, stillness and breath. Time became something felt, not measured, and in that soft, unraveling history cracked open, not because the facts changed, but because we did. We no longer needed to know what happened in 1492 or 1776 or 1969. Those numbers belonged to a spinning world. Instead, we asked different questions. When did we forget how to listen to the sky? When did we begin believing we controlled the world? When did we stop imagining that the earth might someday stop, and what would we do if it did? In libraries, timelines were torn down. The long lines of dates were replaced with concentric circles, pre-spin, the pause, post-rotation. Old textbooks were rewritten, or left behind entirely. New history began with one truth. The moment the sky stopped moving was the moment everything else began to shift. Some historians called it the Great Stillness. Others named it the Breaking. A few simply marked it as Day Zero. Everything before became the time before the silence, and everything after the listening era. Because in the stillness we began to hear ourselves, not just in survival but in memory. Communities gathered in circles to share what had come before. Not facts, stories, not timelines, threads. My grandmother saw the last spinning sunrise. My father crossed the twilight belt with only one shoe and half a map. My mother said birds used to migrate like wind made of wings. It was as if the past had become personal again. Not something printed, but something passed down. And in that passing, it changed. Because history is never fixed. It lives in the mouths of the living. And when the world goes still, the stories move for it. Some turned to archaeology, not of ruins, but of memory. They dug through servers, old hard drives, digital fossils. They found fragments of news feeds, video clips, frozen weather reports. 1,000 tiny mirrors of the spinning world. And they asked, what did we value? What did we ignore? What did we assume would last forever? One group, the Chronoquiet, built an archive with no dates, just feelings. The time when cities were tall and the air was thick with urgency. The days of humming phones and restless fingers. The moment the sun forgot to leave. And perhaps most poignantly, the silence between two people when they realized the old world would not come back. Museums changed too. Exhibits no longer placed artifacts by era, but by sensation. The weight of distance, the texture of hope, the echo of movement. A tattered Metro card sat beside a child's spinning top, a boarding pass next to a compass that no longer worked, and visitors stood quietly, not learning facts, but remembering what motion had once felt like. Education evolved. Children no longer memorized kings and battles. They learned to trace how people adapted. The rise of the edge cities, the first frost gardens, the last breath-powered clock. They asked, how did people find one another when connection fell silent? How did we survive not just the heat or the cold, but the loneliness of an unmoving sky? History in this world became less about what happened and more about what mattered. And in the most remote places, far from surviving settlements, a few wandered out into the forgotten lands. They called themselves the recordless. They left behind all texts, all dates, all names. They walked into the ice or the burn to feel what the world had become, not to remember, but to let go. To write a history not of humans, but of Earth itself. Some returned with nothing, some returned with songs, and some never returned. But in the edge communities, every now and then, a new melody would appear, a phrase no one had heard before. And they would say, perhaps the recordless sent us this. And so history moved forward, not in books, but in breath. A soft retelling, a slow unfolding. Because when the earth stops spinning, the only story that matters is the one we're still willing to tell each other in the dark. They were born after the sky stopped moving, after the clock stopped ticking in rhythm, after the sun locked itself into a single position and the stars froze in place like a forgotten ceiling. These children, they never knew morning. They never learned to fear the dark or chase the light. They never made wishes on shooting stars or waited for snow in winter. They were born into the still. In the cities of eternal day, they squinted their first cries beneath filtered skylights, wrapped in heat-dampened cloth, taught to crawl only after the floor cooled enough to touch. In the frozen settlements, they were delivered in silence breath, visible in the air, bundled in layers, before their skin even knew what skin felt like. And in the twilight belt, the sliver of balance where the light never burned and the dark never smothered, a new kind of childhood began. One not built around the arc of the sun, but around the rhythm of presence. These children learned to name time differently, not in hours or days, but in glows, in warm shifts, in the soft change of mist against the walls. When did you first walk, someone might ask. During the third long mist, a parent would say, they didn't grow up with calendars. They grew up with memory marks, the first fog, the great silence, the night of 300 candles. They didn't say, I'm 5. They said, I've seen 5 warmings. Their lullabies never spoke of counting sheep. Instead, they sang of shadows curling under blankets of light that stretched like honey of a sky that once moved but now listens. And yet, though they never saw a sunrise, they dreamed of it. Somehow. Perhaps the old stories whispered it into their bones, or perhaps imagination unburdened by comparison taught them to conjure what even memory could not. A child once pointed at a curved reflection in glass and asked, is that how the light used to dance? Another drew a circle on the wall and said, that's the sun when it sleeps. These children weren't just different, they were untethered, from seasons, from hours, from the old anxieties of being late or early or behind. They moved through space like water following curiosity, emotion light. Their games were built not on winning, but on wondering. They played hide and seek in temperature gradients, built towers from condensation bricks, wrote stories in dust and ash, erasing them so others could begin again. In their schools, when schools still existed, they didn't learn dates. They learned direction, not north or south, but toward warmth, beneath wind, away from the sharp shine. They didn't memorize facts. They imagined patterns. And through this way of seeing, they began to ask questions older generations had forgotten how to ask. Why do people talk about time like it's straight? Why do we measure age if we all sleep differently? What if the earth stopped so we could finally pay attention? Many adults feared them not for who they were, but for what they represented. A future that didn't long for the past. A generation that might not want to bring the spin back. In some places, they were called the unborn born, not into the earth that was, but into a version that still wasn't understood. But others called them the rememberers, not because they held memory, but because they made it new. These children saw the world not as broken, but as different. They learned from plants that grew sideways, from animals that forgot to migrate, from water that lingered in stillness before rising like steam. They found beauty in imbalance, meaning in shadow, peace in the absence of rush. And when they grew slowly, gently, without clocks to measure them, they began to build. Not towers, not cities, but spaces. Rooms designed around comfort, not schedule. Gardens that glowed at night and dimmed in day. Language that wrapped around emotion like moss on stone. They rewrote the lullabies. They changed the maps. They asked for stories without heroes, only listeners. And when they asked why the earth ever spun in the first place, we didn't always know what to tell them. We just said it moved, and we moved with it. Until one day, it stopped, and they would nod quiet. Not sad, just curious. Maybe they'd say it was tired, or maybe it's still listening. Because they don't need the world to move to believe in movement. They carry it inside. In the way they create, in the way they ask, in the way they still imagine a sunrise they've never seen. And maybe, just maybe, that is what it means to be human, not to remember what was, but to dream what could still be, even when everything stands still. There are places where the sun never rises fully and never truly sets. Places where the light leans sideways, soft, uncertain, filtered through haze and memory. These places are neither day nor night. They are between. And in that narrow in-between life began again. When the earth stopped spinning, the world broke in half. One side scorched under an unmoving sun. The other froze beneath a motionless sky. But between them, in a band of gray and gold, a line of breath remained. They called it many things: the dusk frontier, the breathing edge, the halo, but most simply called it home. It wasn't fertile, it wasn't safe, but it wasn't dead. And that was enough. The first settlers came with nothing but old seeds and older dreams. They didn't come to build cities. They came to plant. They studied the soil not for nutrients, but for memory. Had it known warmth recently? Did it remember water? Could it still hold roots? Some patches responded, others crumbled like ash, but those that lived, they bloomed like secrets. Potatoes were the first, hardy, stubborn, quiet. Then came fungi, then desert grains. Algae ponds shimmered beneath curved glass, glowing faintly with engineered light. People harvested not fields, but pockets of patience. Rows of greens inside long, half-buried domes, gardens that hummed with filtered warmth. Not farms, exactly biospheres. Everything was small, everything was intentional. Water was sacred, not poured, but woven, misted through air, caught from breath wrung from wind. Entire systems were built to condense morning haze, to channel surface temperature into underground reservoirs. People learned to read the fog like a language. The dew harvesters became revered, engineers and poets in equal measure. And energy was never constant. Too dark for solar, too dim for wind, too unstable for flame. So they turned inward, tapped heat from the belly of the earth, coiled underground vents into their homes, used pressure movement, even footsteps, to power light. A child walking across a copper floor could power a reading lamp for 10 minutes. They called it step lighting. The children ran in circles for hours, laughing in the glow they created. Everything was recycled: heat, cold, words. Nothing was wasted. Every whisper, every drop, every forgotten fruit seed mattered. And over time, as the system stabilized, something new emerged, not just survival, but design. The twilight belt began to bloom, not with concrete, not with towers, but with living spaces, homes grown from flexible polymer vines, roofs that breathed, walls that shifted color to reflect mood or temperature, communities laid out in spirals, not grids, built for flow, not speed. And in the center of each one, a seed library. Thousands of envelopes, old seeds, new seeds, future seeds, labeled not by region but by light, need, resilience, taste, memory. The most prized were the before seeds, those carried from the old world. Tomato, basil, corn, lavender. They grew crooked, small, faint in flavor, but they grew. And when the first tomato ripened in a glass box near the edge of the gray, people cried. Not for the taste, but because it remembered the sun. They passed the seeds like relics, swapped soil stories like currency, shared meals under quiet sky domes, eating with reverence, with laughter, with long silences between bites. Food became ritual, a reminder that life could be coaxed, not just forced. The children who grew up here never questioned it. They called soil warm snow. They called light drinkable. They didn't miss summer. They didn't fear drought. They measured harvests not by size, but by song. The spinach sang today, someone might say, meaning it lived a little easier. Hope here was not loud. It didn't shout. It didn't shine. It rooted, slowly, in silence, underfoot, among fingernails and knuckles and dirt-worn palms, and though the earth no longer turned, these gardens did. They turned minds, turned hearts, turned a broken world into something soft again. Because in a place where nothing moves to grow something, anything is the loudest kind of miracle. And in the warmth of those domes, under the breath of filtered light, people didn't just survive. They began. At first we bent, then we broke. And then, slowly, steadily, we changed. When the earth stopped spinning, physics didn't end, but it shifted. Gravity held on, but the sky let go. The air thickened in some places, vanished in others. Magnetic lines tangled like thread. Oceans crept sideways, crawling toward the equator. Storms refused to move. And in the stillness, everything we once called normal fell away. The human body was not made for this. Too soft for the heat, too warm for the cold, too rhythmic for a world that had lost its pulse. We slept wrong, ate wrong, moved wrong. Our bones weakened in low-motion cities, our lungs strained in thin, frosted air. Melatonin stuttered, circadian rhythms shattered like brittle clocks. But still, we endured. Because adaptation is not a gift. It's a compulsion, a whisper in the marrow, a promise written in DNA. You will change or you will fade. In the burn zones, humans became mirror-skinned. Not literally, but their clothing evolved into reflective layers woven with heat-dispersing fibers. Skin itself darkened not from sun, but from artificial melanin therapies, absorbing less, resisting more. Eyes were shielded with second eyelids, thin, transparent membranes grown through gene edits, blinking sideways to filter light. Some communities wore full body suits laced with capillaries that mimicked sweating. A synthetic skin, breathing in the heat, breathing out the fear. In the frostlands, bodies thickened, not just in clothing but in the blood. Bioengineered hemoglobin increased oxygen capacity. Breathing masks were replaced with lung scarves, organic filters that warmed air before it entered the chest. Children were born with slower heart rates, more efficient muscle fibers, and fingers shaped to retain warmth. Even dreams changed slower, longer, deeper. Sleep wasn't rest anymore. It was adaptation time. The twilight belt became the cradle of transition. There, between extremes, humanity began to reinvent itself, not just biologically, but culturally. Time was no longer a line. It became a spiral. Schedules vanished. In their place, responsive living. Homes pulsed with adaptive lighting temperature shifts, guided by biometric sensors. Meals weren't served by clock, but by need. You ate when your sugar dipped. You slept when your blood signaled fatigue. People became fluent in their own chemistry. A new literacy, reading the self. Families taught children not letters first, but pulses, breath rate, core temperature. The body became the calendar, the compass, the weather report. And society, too, reshaped itself. Governance was no longer rigid. Councils shifted with the climate. Leadership rotated based on sleep cycles and cognitive clarity. Some cities elected decision-makers not by popularity, but by who had the most stable biorhythm in a given cycle. Religion adapted. Some believed the earth's stillness was divine, a final form. Others saw the transformation of the human body as sacred. Churches were replaced by reflection halls, where people sat in mirrored circles, observing their own adaptation. "We are not who we were," they whispered, "and that is our blessing." Language changed again. Words emerged for the feeling of adjusting, the moment when skin stops resisting heat, the pause before your breath aligns with frost. Culture celebrated slowness, not as laziness, but as harmony. There were no medals for speed, only recognition for sustainability. Art was made with biodegradable inks that faded over weeks, intentionally temporary. Sculptures melted slowly. Music adjusted itself in real time to the listener's heartbeat. Everything pulsed, gently. Even the cities breathed. Walls opened and closed with wind shifts. Roads brightened or dimmed based on foot traffic. Nothing was fixed. Everything responded. Humanity, once obsessed with control, learned to surrender. Not in weakness, in wisdom. And not all adaptation was biological. Some chose machines, neural link implants that regulated sleep, exosuits that helped the elderly survive frost shock, memory banks installed beneath the skin. A few uploaded their minds into satellite clusters, choosing to orbit rather than endure. Others became still monks, fasting from technology, body and voice living only on the edge of light, whispering to the earth each day. Are you ready to turn again? But perhaps the most beautiful adaptation was emotional. Empathy expanded. People didn't ask, "How are you?" anymore. They asked, "Where are you in your shift? Have you balanced today?" Mental health became public health. Communities practiced synchronized silence, shared stillness. Rest days weren't breaks from labor. They were realignments, collective recalibration. And through it all, something unexpected bloomed, not just survival, but joy. In small things, a fruit grown in a place once called dead, a child's drawing of a sky that never moved, a breath held and released with someone beside you. These became ceremonies, because in a world that no longer turns, we became the motion. We became the weather, the warmth, the clock. We became the force that said yes to the impossible, the uncomfortable, the unfamiliar. And in doing so, we didn't just adapt, we evolved, not into something new, but into something closer to what we always were meant to be. For so long we prayed for movement, whispered into the frost, pleaded beneath the burning sky, hoped quietly, secretly, that maybe, just maybe, the earth would turn again, that the sunrise would return, that the stars would finally drift again, even just a little. And then it did. No warning, no tremble, no divine voice from the clouds, just a subtle shift so slight that some thought it was a dream, a ripple in the oceans, a distant creak from deep beneath the crust. Then the air moved, just a breeze, a breath. But it was enough. The earth, still for generations, had begun to rotate again. And suddenly, shorba, everything we had become was at risk. The world didn't leap into full speed, it groaned into motion. But even that slow return was too fast. The oceans, held in still patterns for decades, surged sideways. Coastlines vanished under walls of ancient tension. Cities built into quiet shallows were the first to fall. The tides dormant for so long came back like a scream, wild, unchained, vengeful. Earthquakes followed, not from fault lines, but from memory. The planet itself cracked with forgotten rhythm. Tectonic plates lurched as if awakening from a long, violent dream. Buildings toppled, not because they were weak, but because they had never been designed to move. Even the wind returned like a stranger. Atmospheric currents once stalled began to shift. Air no longer hung heavy or stood still, it raced. Dust storms tore through twilight gardens. Fires spread in zones once cooled by stillness. And the light began to move again. The sun, once a fixed eye above the horizon, now crawled. Slowly it began to rise, then dip, and rise again. The world blinked. Shadows reappeared. People screamed when they saw one stretch. "What is that?" a child whispered, pointing. "Why is the ground moving?" asked another. It wasn't fear exactly. It was vertigo of the soul, because generations had lived without motion, and now every hour brought new imbalance. Clocks came back, but they meant nothing. 12 hours of light felt foreign. The body, long tuned to still rhythms, collapsed under cycling conditions. People fainted in the midday heat, then froze at midnight. Melatonin surged, then disappeared. Sleep cycles spiraled. Depression spiked. Panic followed. Technology failed again. Solar grids calibrated for fixed light now overcharged or shut down. Heating systems timed for shadow couldn't keep up with changing light angles. Agricultural domes wilted under inconsistent sun. Algae blooms collapsed. The ecosystems we had built so delicately balanced in the pause began to die in the wake of the return. And yet, even in that chaos, some felt wonder. The sky was moving. Clouds changed shape. The stars wandered again. Time returned not as a tyrant, but as a song we once knew the words to. People gathered to watch the first full sunset in generations. They wept not from grief, but from recognition. It was beautiful. It was terrifying. It was alive. But what about us? Could we survive this rebirth? We had adapted to stillness, our cities, our bodies, our minds. Some could not handle the motion. The elderly grown used to constant gravity, developed motion sickness that never left. Some infants cried endlessly under rotating sky domes, their nervous systems unable to comprehend the shifting light. Others, though, embraced it. Children ran faster, laughed at the moving shadows, danced in pools of changing gold. A new kind of adaptation began. Medicine raced to keep up, stimulants for wakefulness, serums for nausea, exosuits to buffer motion, neural implants reprogrammed circadian rhythms daily. But society itself had to ask a deeper question. Do we want the earth to turn again? Some said yes, that it was proof life could return, that time could flow again, that history had a future. Others said no, that the stillness had taught us something motion never could: how to listen, how to build without rush, how to breathe without expectation. Entire communities chose to relocate back to stable zones, regions where rotation hadn't yet returned. They called themselves the holdfasts. They wore shadow cloth, rejected clocks, planted gardens by feel. But even they could not escape. The truth motion was coming for all of us. Slowly, surely. A planet cannot spin just a little. It spins or it doesn't. And the more it turned, the more we remembered what we had lost and what we had learned to live without. Some dreamed of restoring the full 24-hour cycle. Others dreamed of stopping it again. But deep down, we all knew the earth had remembered itself. And now we had to decide who we would become in motion. Not who we used to be, not who we were in stillness, but something new, something braver, something that could hold both movement and memory. Because in the end, it wasn't the spin that defined us. It was the way we chose to stay standing no matter which way the world turned. Maybe the earth will never turn again. Maybe the slow creak we once mistook for motion was just a sigh, a settling, a final hush after a long spinning breath. And maybe, just maybe, that's okay. Because after all the longing, all the calculation, all the plans to restart the spin, we began to ask a quieter question. What if we never needed it? Could we live not temporarily, not as survivors, but fully permanently, in a world that never moves. Could stillness become our new orbit? The idea felt absurd at first. Our biology, our culture, even our dreams had once been shaped by motion. The arc of the sun, the rhythm of seasons, the tilt, the pull, the dance. But that was before. Before we learned to live in halves, before we built cities in the twilight and caught water from mist. Before we made gardens out of nothing and measured time with breath. The question wasn't whether we could endure. We had already proven that. The question was, could we thrive? And the answer slowly began to unfold around us, in the warmth of self-regulating shelters, in the steady harvests from crops that didn't need day or night, in the rise of children who had never known a moving sky and didn't miss it. We no longer relied on global systems. We learned to live locally, rhythmically, not with clocks, but with our surroundings. In the burn zones, mirrored cities shifted with light like petals. In the frostlands, people etched new forms of art into ice that never melted. In the soft light of the edge belt, communities passed stories around fires that never flickered with wind. We became adapters, not chasers. Where we once worshipped the future, we now tended to the present. The concept of progress no longer meant faster, further, more. It meant deeper, quieter, wiser. Some feared that without rotation we would grow stagnant, that we would become small. But in truth, we grew more precise. We built shelters that mimicked planetary balance. We programmed lights that shifted in colors the sun had never dreamed of. We engineered bodies that thrived in half light, half shadow. We did not stop evolving. We just evolved differently. Philosophy shifted too. In the past, movement meant meaning. Everything was about forward, ascending, becoming. But now we discovered the richness of being, the texture of stillness, the complexity of a moment held not rushed. The word future softened. It became a direction, not a demand. We no longer asked, where are we going? We asked, who are we becoming right here? And slowly, across generations, a truth settled in. Maybe we had always been trying to catch up with the planet, always rushing to match the spin, always waking too early, working too late, planning too far. Now, without the spin, we caught up to ourselves. Relationships grew longer, conversations slower, art more layered. We created music that lasted hours, dances that unfolded over days, architecture that shifted not to resist time, but to reflect it. And within this new stillness, we found something we had lost: intimacy with our place. We stopped racing across continents. We fell in love with the dirt beneath our feet. We learned the names of the winds that no longer moved, the taste of light at different angles, the sound of a wall expanding with heat, the sigh of a room cooling at dusk. Some still dreamed of restarting the spin, but the dream grew fainter, like a memory whose urgency had passed. Because what was the spin if not a condition we had outgrown? What was motion if not something we had learned to carry within us, no longer needing the sky to turn for us to feel awake, or the clock to count for us to feel real? We became people of the pause, still, but not stagnant, quiet, but not empty. Our hearts beat, our stories flowed, our lives pulsed with the only rhythm that ever truly mattered: each other. So, can we live without the earth spinning? Yes. And more than that, we already are. It doesn't speak. It never has. But if you've ever stood barefoot on cool soil or felt a tremble in the windless air, you might understand. The earth whispers, not in words, in weight, in presence, in the still hush before rain, in the hum beneath your spine when you lie on stone. And now, after all the storms and silence, after the chaos of stopping and the wondering of whether we would ever move again, that whisper remains. Maybe it always will. A soft, steady murmur, I'm still here. For so long we chased the spin. We thought movement was meaning, that history must arc, that progress must march, that we were meant to go faster, higher forward, always forward. But then the earth stopped, and so did we. At first it felt like death, like a curtain falling, but slowly with each unmeasured breath it became something else. An embrace, gentle, firm, patient, the kind of stillness that doesn't ask for anything, only presence. And in that stillness, we remembered who we were, not as nations, not as industries, but as people, with hands that still reached, with eyes that still searched, with hearts that still beat not in time with clocks, but with each other. We remembered how to touch without rushing, how to speak without performing, how to build something not because it had never been done, but because it felt true. The domes we raised in the frost, the mirrored gardens in the glow, the words we invented to say, "I understand," when no translation existed. The quiet songs hummed to children who had never seen a falling star. We learned to live in shadow without fear, in light without worship, in silence without absence. And maybe most of all, we learned that the world didn't owe us rhythm. We owed it listening. Some say the earth is still broken, that without its spin it has lost its soul. But others believe quietly, gently, that it has simply come to rest, that after spinning for billions of years, it is tired. And in that rest, it has offered us something rare, a long, unbroken breath. We are no longer creatures of dawn and dusk. We are children of pause, of held space, of patience. And in that stillness, we have become more than we were, not through technology, not through conquest, but through acceptance. The last generation to remember movement is nearly gone. Their stories fade past like smoke through memory. And yet the children of stillness carry something new, not grief, not longing, but presence. They don't ask when the earth will turn again. They ask how to make this moment matter. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps when all is said and done, the final message of a planet that no longer spins is not a warning, but a reminder to stop, to breathe, to feel the weight beneath your feet, to love what is still here. Because even in the quiet, the earth holds us. Even without motion, it remembers us, not in data, not in monuments, but in roots, in warmth, in the way light leans on stone at just the right angle to make you close your eyes and smile. Maybe the earth is no longer spinning, but maybe it's hugging us, not forever, just long enough for us to say, "We hear you now," and in the hush that follows, we whisper back, "We're still here too."